she was no longer the Minister of Communications, that she had flown her relatives and people that have friends to her budget speech. Now, what was happening at the time was that we had issued an instruction as a committee that ministers must be careful on how they spend, because we were facing a contracting economy, and South Africa was generally National Treasury had reported to us that the situation was not looking good in terms of the public finances. So we were going to hold Minister Muthambi accountable for that. We wanted to get a clarity from her. In fact, we were not even expecting a written report. We were expecting an oral report from her, because we wanted to hear her side of the story. The matter was reported in the media, and we wanted to verify those allegations. And as a person who was from the ruling party, I had heard other members of the opposition complaining about that. They came to me to say, there is this allegation about Minister Faith Muthambi. What is going to happen about that? So we were going to have a meeting on the 15th August 2017 as a study group. The meeting, if I'm not mistaken, was scheduled for 10 o'clock because Minister Faith Muthambi was going to appear at 2 o'clock. Now, on that day, I was surprised when I got to the meeting at 10 o'clock. In fact, I got there a few minutes before 10 o'clock, which is what I always did. I always arrived early. And I knew that Manuel was not going to be present at that meeting because she had issues, her own personal issues. She was the whip of the committee. So I was expecting to chair that meeting because she had asked me that I would chair that meeting because she will be gone. So to my surprise, I found that there was a Minister Faith Muthambi at this meeting, by the way, who was not attending meetings of the study group. I was expecting her to attend later on that day to account before the committee. But on this particular day, Minister Faith Muthambi was there together with Sizani Dlamini, who was not, even though she was the chair of the governance cluster, she was not attending any of our public service and administration committee meetings. So I found it odd that she was there. And there were other members, such as Councillor Mervyn Dex, the former deputy mayor of Pietermaritzburg, that was recalled at some stage by the ANC and subsequently promoted to go to national parliament. There was also MP Dean Dombela. There was also MP Velma Newhouse-Ratchers, and the other person that was there was obviously the secretariat of the study group. To my surprise, I was shocked when Sizani then said, MP, Honorable Member Sizani, took the ANC constitution and she started wielding it and told me that the meeting is about to commence and she's going to be the chair of the meeting. And at that meeting, together with all of them, Faith Muthambi and them, they were accusing me of following conscience. And they were even pointing out to the constitution that there was nothing called conscience in the ANC constitution. They went through a series of charges of the rules that I had broken. I'm not gonna go through that. But what was strange to me was that at that meeting, I was charged and I was also even fired by the study group. And they were telling me that from that day, I'm no longer going to be the chair of the study group. It's then that and they were saying all meetings of the portfolio committees, parliamentary portfolio committees are suspended. Now, I tried to tell them that that was not relevant, but they said to me, well, they as a study group, they have that power. So it's then that I actually contacted Cedric Frolic to advise on what to do.
I'd just like to interrupt you there, and I'd just like to take you to part of what happened in that meeting. It's referred to in your affidavit at paragraph 11.8 and 11.9. You've already told the chair that part of the complaint against you was this question of conscience. But if you could just take us through what you dealt with in paragraphs 11.8 and 11.9 of your affidavit, please.
Well, I was told that I had brought the name of the ANC into disrepute by my questioning of Ms. Dudumieni, and in my capacity as the then member of the Standing Committee on Finance, and by my remarks in the SABC inquiry about Dr. Ben Ngubane. And I also had written, which is true, about the recycling of failure. So they were accusing me that I had also done that. I had accused the ANC of recycling failure. Basically, what I was referring to there was that Faith Muthambi was the Minister of Communications, and we had, as a committee, as the SABC inquiry, the ad hoc committee on SABC, we had recommended to the president to review the position of Faith Muthambi. Basically, we were simply saying to the president, in short, President, this person is incompetent, and with the manner in which she has managed SABC. But subsequently, she was promoted. So they were accusing me of that. They also even alluded to issues that had to do with SABC and Hlaudi Mutsoneng. And they also spoke about the vote of no confidence and conscience. So basically, that's what had happened. And from that, I was never given an opportunity to respond. I was then told that they can no longer be led by the vote by conscience.
So you say in your affidavit that they all criticized you, and you say in your affidavit, Ms. Muthambi is one of these who criticized you for the fact that you had raised these criticisms of comrades in the various oversight committees about which you've already referred. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what's more, your committee, according to your affidavit, also criticized you for having called Ms. Muthambi to account to your committee as you've just described. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You say that Ms. Muthambi nodded her approval of this criticism. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, you deal in your affidavit, and I'm not going to deal with it in any detail now, about how you took this up in structures within the leadership of the ANC in Parliament. But I do want to draw attention to paragraph 11.20.
I'm sorry, Mr. Freund. I think seeing that you are moving to that far, can I just ask Dr. Khoza about some of the evidence she has just given? Dr. Khoza, are you saying that the meeting...
I can't hear.
You can't hear? Okay. Let me bring the mic closer. Is that better?
Yes, it's much better.
Okay, you must just say whenever I'm talking too soft, I'm too used to people saying my voice is loud. So, so I tried not to be loud. Who was saying you should not have called Minister Muthambi to account about what you had read in the media, namely that she had flown or whatever a number of her friends and relatives to Parliament inappropriately, as I understand the matter? Who was saying that? Was that the Committee of Parliament that you were chairing, but on that day you were not chairing? Was that a study group of the party?
That complaint arose because the members of the opposition, who are members of the committee, had brought to our attention that there was wide media coverage on Minister Muthambi having flown her relatives to her budget speech. So basically, we simply wanted her to give us her side of the story. And it was the committee decided, because that matter had been discussed previously and at a previous portfolio committee meeting, but we then said, no, we needed to afford the minister an opportunity to come and give her oral report at the following meeting. So it was essentially a decision of the committee that she should be invited to come and account on that, to give us clarity, give us a side of the story.
Yes, but you have testified about a meeting, I think that Mr. Sizane chaired, which was also attended by Ms. Muthambi. Was that a meeting of the study group for the ANC, as opposed to a meeting
Yes.
of a structure of parliament?
It was a meeting of it was the ANC study group chairperson.
Oh, and they
It was
said,
the parliamentary committee.
yes, and among other things, you say they said you or your committee should not have called Minister Muthambi to account about what had been seen in the media.
Pardon, chairperson?
Did they say, I just want to clarify that I understood you correctly, did the study group of the ANC that you are talking about at that meeting say that you should not have called Minister Muthambi to come and account or provide clarification about the allegations in the media against her?
No, the committee was not concerned about that. The way it happened, I just got in and I was kind of ambushed, because I got into the meeting expecting us to discuss the strategy of how we wish to handle that matter of Faith Muthambi. But to my surprise, Faith Muthambi was also at that meeting, and it looked like they had already had a pre-meeting. And they were not concerned about what the meeting in the afternoon, because it seemed as though they had already discussed and concluded that the parliamentary committee meeting, which was scheduled for 2:00 that same day, will not be taking place, because they were asking the Secretary General Gwede Mantashe to give them the name of the new chairperson. So they were talking basically about all the accusations. It became like a disciplinary hearing, except that I was never advised in advance that there was going to be some kind of disciplinary hearing.
But was the discussion confined, or your criticism by them confined to the Muthambi issue, or were they going over a number of matters in which they disapproved of how you may have handled them?
Chairperson, as I said, the person who was chairing that meeting was Honorable Member Sizane Dlamini Tubazana. And she made it very clear, even during that meeting, that there's only one item, and that item concerned myself, my ill discipline, and it was not about Muthambi. Muthambi was just part of that meeting, and I was not in control of what was discussed. So it only discussed the issues or allegations relating to my ill discipline.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Freund?
Thank you, Chair. I understand what you've just said, Dr. Khoza, but I think what the Chair is trying to get at is the question of what was the ill discipline that you were accused of? And if we look at paragraph 11.8 and 11.9, you seem there to describe what it was that they were accusing you of. So I would like you just to maybe read into the record those paragraphs and then tell the judge whether you stand by that or whether you wish to change that in any way.
Chairperson, what is written there is absolutely correct. I'm standing by what I have submitted.
So what you said there is this, that you were told that you had brought the name of the ANC into disrepute by your questioning of Ms. Dudu Mnyeni in the SCOF, by your remark in the SABC inquiry about Dr. Ben Ngubane and recycling failure, by your criticisms in the SABC inquiry of Ms. Faith Mutambi and Mr. Hlaudi Motswaneng, and you were told you should not have attracted comrades like these. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairperson.
And you
Safe
were
to say that there was also something they said something specifically on the vote of no confidence, that I was ill-disciplined on that one.
Yes, that you dealt with earlier in the same affidavit,
Yeah.
and I agree that was part of what they said. But another part of what they said, you deal with in paragraph 11.9. You say, I was also criticized for requiring Ms. Mutambi to come to account to the Portfolio Committee about the recent allegations against her. It was alleged that it was unacceptable for me to call, and I quote, our own ANC minister, unquote, to account in this way, and Ms. Mutambi nodded her approval of this criticism. Do you stand by that?
Yes, I stand by that, Chairperson.
Then you say
And
in
Ms.
paragraph...
Mutambi, in fact, ended up not even attending the meeting. That meeting at 2 o'clock, she didn't attend. She actually, I suppose, implemented the decision of the study group that said I was no longer the chairperson.
I'd also like to refer you to paragraph 11.10 of your affidavit, because there you say the following. It was made clear to me by those present, including Ms. Mutambi, that they agreed with what was being conveyed to me. They were given turns to speak, and they all endorsed or added to what is set out above. Do you stand by that?
Absolutely, Chairperson. I was alone in that meeting, basically. In fact, I'm just saying there was no other person that was on my side, because Honorable Lisoma had decided not to attend that meeting.
I'm sorry, Mr. Freund.
Paragraph 11.
I'm sorry, Mr. Freund.
Yes, sir.
I take it that the study group consisted of MPs only, obviously ANC MPs. It did not include anybody who was not an ANC person, ANC MP, is that correct?
The study group chairperson consisted of myself as the chairperson of the Public Service and Administration Committee, also an MP, Mr. Dean Dombela, who was also a member of the committee, the Portfolio Committee, the Portfolio Parliamentary Committee on the Public Service and Administration, Mr. Mervyn Dex, who was also an MP, and Ms. Velma Newhow Duchess, who was also a member of Parliament, as well as both the Minister of Department of Public Service and Administration and the head deputy, Ms. Dipoele Tsatsiduba. Those were the members of the study group of the ANC.
So those are the people who, according to your paragraph 11.10, all endorsed the decisions that were taken in that committee, in that meeting.
Yes, it is important. It is important to note that Ms. Sizani Dubazana was the ANC cluster chairperson. She's also a member of Parliament,
Yes.
but was not necessarily a member of the ANC, was not one of those ANC members who were part of the parliamentary study group However, she was the chairperson of the ANC governance cluster to which the public service and administration belonged.
Okay.
So she was using her powers as the chair of the ANC cluster, governance cluster, to direct the meeting and to assist the members in terms of making sure that a decision was taken on my ill discipline.
Otherwise, normally, who would chair that study group's meetings?
That study group meeting will ordinarily be chaired by Ms. Manuel as the whip of the ANC committee, a study group.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Freund. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Now, what you explain in your affidavit is that apart from what you've already told the Chair about what you were accused of, you also explained that at that same meeting, the study group purported to make a decision that the portfolio committee meeting scheduled for that very afternoon would simply not happen. And you told the Chair before the lunch adjournment that they not only decreed that, they then directed, for example, I think you said the Director General not to attend the portfolio committee that afternoon. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. They directed all the different departments that accounted to the committee. Only the Public Service and Public Service Commission attended the meeting at 2 o'clock, but otherwise everyone else did not attend.
Now, you say in your affidavit that you sought clarity, for example, I think you spoke to Mr. Froelich, if I'm not mistaken. You were told,
yes, I did.
You were told, no, they don't have that power. You must continue to go to the meeting, and you went to the meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. In fact, even Jackson Mthembu spoke to me. I spoke to Jackson Mthembu about it as the whip, and he directed me to go ahead. He was so furious. Jackson Mthembu was so furious about what the ANC study group, the decision that was taken by the ANC study group, because he felt that they have no jurisdiction in the matters, in directing the business of Parliament, in saying a parliamentary program must continue or must stop. So he then instructed, Manuel, who was not present that day, to tell all the members of the ANC to go to attend the meeting at 2 o'clock. And in fact, what actually happened is that none of them attended. The only person that attended that meeting was Nyami Boy. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention his name earlier on. He was also a member of the portfolio committee. He's the only one that responded to the chief whip's call that all members of the study group must attend. No program of parliament can be stopped by a study group of the ANC. But Minister Mutambi did not attend that meeting, and that made the EFF and the DA extremely angry at that meeting, because they had seen her in the parliamentary precinct. They couldn't understand why she was not at the meeting.
Now, one of the members of the study group who you've mentioned several times already was Mr. Melvin Dirks, who you refer to in paragraph 11.20. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairperson.
And notwithstanding what you've already told us, Mr. Dirks was one of those who did not attend the portfolio committee meeting that afternoon. Is that
Who's
correct?
that? Sorry, I didn't.
Melvin Dirks did not attend.
Melvin Dirks was at that meeting. The person that was not at the meeting was Maina Lisoma. Melvin Dirks was one of those people who was at the meeting. And he had a serious bone to chew with me.
I think you may have misunderstood my question. I'm now not talking about the study group meeting. I'm talking about the portfolio committee meeting in the afternoon. And I'm asking you whether Mr. Melvin Dirks attended the portfolio committee meeting in the afternoon.
No, none of the members of the study group of the ANC attended except for Nyami Boy.
Right. Now, in paragraph 11.20 of your affidavit, you quote a social media posting by Mr. Dirks, and you say that he said, amongst other things, and I now quote, "All of us must submit to the ANC position before we can attend any portfolio committee meeting as ANC MPs. We cannot have an ANC study group position called conscience when we go to the portfolio meeting. The ANC study group called off the portfolio committee meeting, but Dr. Makhosi is above the ANC and defied the study group's decision." And he goes on. Is that correct? Is that part of what he said in his post?
Yes, that's correct.
And you then deal on in the paragraphs that follow with the fallout that came from what had happened at the study group meeting and the portfolio committee meeting. And you say that initially Mr. Mthembu was supportive of you, or so it seemed. But then in paragraph 11.22, you explain what happened next. You say Mr. Mthembu adopted a different position. What was his different position as you deal with it in paragraph 11.22?
Mr. Mthembu, in fact, what had actually happened, and I do recall that there was a strategy meeting that I was called to. The current minister, Togo Didiza, was also present at that meeting, where Mr. Mthembu was very furious and even, in fact, called for the members of the ANC study group to be disciplined. However, subsequent to that, Mthembu adopted a different position. He started accusing me of ill discipline, and that there will be no organization if people were allowed to vote with their conscience. And I couldn't understand it because all along, I thought that Mthembu and myself were in sync. And after all, I attended the meeting. I went ahead with the meeting at 2:00 because of his alignment with what I thought was correct, that a study group of the ANC cannot dictate the program of parliament. But Mthembu had actually changed. And when I went to, I think I just landed at OR Tambo Airport. I was going to deliver a lecture on Route First when Jackson Mthembu phoned me as soon as I landed to advise me that the organization has decided to recall me because there will be no organization if we follow this thing called the conscience. And he said by instruction that he got from the Secretary General, and he had the letter. I didn't have the letter. He read the letter to me. I never received the letter. So he then told me that I was immediately released from my position as the chair of the portfolio committee on public service and administration.
And the Secretary General to whom you are referring at that time would be Mr. Gwedi Montashe, is that correct?
Yes, it is Gwedi Montashe.
Now, you referred a little earlier, a couple of minutes ago, to what happened at a strategy meeting. And that is a structure that has not yet been referred to in these proceedings. If you could just describe what is the strategy meeting and how senior would the people involved in that be?
Well, the strategy meeting of the ANC is very senior, and it's where we get the ministers and really discuss where certain members of the ANC that are going, leadership of the ANC. It's not normal, it's not the ordinary members of the ANC most of the time that attend the strategy committee. You will have Chair Togo Didiza, who was the committee of chairs. You will have the chief whip, the deputy chief whip who are members, and you will also, and they had the powers of summoning any member, whether it's the minister, the chair of the portfolio committee, maybe just to hear us out on what were the issues that we were going to be dealing with in the committee. And most of the time we'll be called to that strategy meeting when an issue was controversial, or it was an issue that probably was of concern to the ANC. But on the whole, the strategy committee was really over ensuring that Parliament was, the ANC component of Parliament was doing what it is supposed to do. On the whole, they were doing that because it is that strategy committee that took the decision, together with Jackson Mthembu, that those members that had instructed parliamentary program to be disrupted and not to cancel the meeting of the portfolio committee, they said those members must be disciplined. So that was the decision of that strategy committee.
So the strategy committee meeting really came out on your side, but
definitely
thereafter, you say in paragraph 11.22, Mr. Mthembu told you that he had now been instructed by the Secretary General, Mr. Gwedi Mantashe, that you were to be relieved of your duties because a committee cannot be led by someone who has voted according to her conscience. Is that your evidence?
Yes, that's right.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Freund. So, Dr. Khoza, you have said that the people who would attend a strategy meeting would be senior people in the party, but would that be a strategy meeting of the ANC in Parliament? In other words, it would consist of senior ANC people within Parliament, or would it have been a strategy meeting of the party outside of Parliament, but could cover work relating to Parliament?
No, it was senior people of the ANC that are senior leadership of the ANC within Parliament.
Oh,
that were members of the committee. They had the powers even to call on the president. Maybe there is an issue. Like, for example, in my case, I was called before the committee to come and clarify to the committee what had transpired the previous day when the study group had taken the decision to suspend all parliamentary committees of the Public Service and Administration. So it was a crisis issue that they were beset with, that they were trying to resolve, which is why they called me in. I was not a member of that committee. I was called in as the leader of the portfolio committee and a senior member of the ANC within that committee, that parliamentary committee.
So those senior ANC MPs who were in that strategy meeting thought that what the study group had done to you was wrong and unacceptable. But subsequently, Mr. Mthembu said to you, is it the following day or shortly thereafter, that the Secretary General of the party, namely Mr. Mantashe, had spoken to him and said that a decision had been taken to recall you as chairperson of the committee.
Yes, it was the intervention of Gwede Mantashe because he had written a letter which was supposed to be given to me by the chief whip. And the chief whip, unfortunately, I had already left. And the chief whip phoned me to read me the letter that he received from the Secretary General. In fact, at some stage when I said to him, oh, well, that's fine, he thought I didn't understand that I have been recalled with immediate effect. And he had to remind me that, do you understand that you are no longer the chairperson of the Public Service and Administration? So I said, I understood you, Chief Whip. I understand. And yeah, that's how it happened.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Freund, continue.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to the Strategy Committee because a witness yet to testify has consulted with me and has led me to understand that ordinarily the Strategy Committee meeting is chaired by the leader of government business, who ordinarily is the Deputy President, and in that particular session of Parliament was the then Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, is that ordinarily correct? That
yes, absolutely. I'm so sorry. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, it seeks to create like calm harmony as well between Parliament and the executive, so that most of the time where there are real serious issues, like if maybe there is a minister who is not towing the line, the leader of government business is sensitized because he is actually the leader in that committee. And he also plays his role in ensuring that members of the executive adhere to the rule of law.
You were not a member of that strategy committee, but you were called to a meeting on that particular day of the strategy committee. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
And do you remember whether or not on that particular occasion the then leader of government business was at that meeting?
Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa was not there. I don't think he was at that meeting. He wasn't at that meeting. But there was almost unanimity, except maybe Doris Dlagute, who was not very happy with the tone of the meeting. But generally, everyone else was dismayed by the manner in which the ANC study group behaved.
I want to finally deal, well, two final questions. The one, we haven't referred to the fact that you resigned. That you deal with in some detail in your paragraph 12. Maybe you could just briefly summarize what it was that finally pushed you to tender your resignation.
What had actually happened, I wrote a long letter to the Secretary General, Gwede Mandashe, concerning my own experiences in Parliament, and basically I was at pain in terms of explaining to him how, you know, the ANC is even interfering is interfering in a negative way in how we execute our role of as members of Parliament who are supposed to perform the oversight function over the executive. I also objected about the disciplinary steps that were pending against me, that taken by the KZN disciplinary structure. Mind you, I come from KwaZulu-Natal, so not only was I facing a disciplinary process in Parliament, but also the ANC in KZN had started its own process of disciplining me, and they also pointed out that they were going to ensure that the ANC deals with me. That was the KwaZulu-Natal ANC. So you had those parallel things, and I then pointed out to him that I have a problem because right now, I'm at national level. You must remember that the ANC structures, the way they are arranged such that they are in harmony with the structures at government level. So I was expecting that because I was at national level and what I was accused of was that which was about a national issue, a national government issue, if you like, because it concerned the vote of no confidence on the president. I complained to him about that because now there was this KZN structure, which was also charging me on the issue, on a national issue. I received no reply from President, from Gwede Mantashe. I also even alluded to Gwede Mantashe, to the fact that I feel as though my right, my constitutional right, as per Section 15 of the Constitution, to the right of conscience is being violated. I reminded him of even what the court ruling. I did remind him about that, but unfortunately, he didn't respond to me.
And having not received a response from him, what then did you decide?
It was at a stage where I was dealing with so many issues at the same time. My life was being threatened. In fact, even the then deputy president, during one of the National Assembly sittings, he saw me outside, and he was leaving, and he saw me. I was sitting outside the bench, outside the chamber, and he said to me, "Be safe." I mean, because everybody knew that my life was being threatened because of my stand on the vote of no confidence. So Cyril Ramaphosa said that to me. But what I found very difficult was that I was being hauled to the disciplinary process in KZN. I was handling death threats. I was having water being discharged into my property. I was dealing with so many issues. It was becoming so unbearable. And the Speaker of Parliament, who had undertaken that no member of Parliament will be harmed, was silent. I tried several times to secure a meeting with her, but she was just not there for me. And ultimately, I decided that I no longer belonged to this organization. To me, it was clear that the ANC had adopted corruption as its new policy. It was an official policy, because the only thing I was guilty of was to stand for that which was right. I did not do anything wrong in terms of my role as a member of Parliament. I don't believe that I brought the name of the ANC into disrepute, but it appeared as though I was the one that was guilty of having done something wrong, and not those that had done something wrong. So I resigned.
Thank you, Dr. Khoza. I have no further questions.
Well, Dr. Khoza, it may well be that if certain evidence that I've had from different witnesses and from you about how the ANC handled the issue of its members of parliament performing their oversight functions is true. It may well be that the ruling party may be responsible for quite some share of members of parliament not having performed its oversight functions over the executive effectively and properly, to the extent that I may find in the end that that is the case. So if I find that over the years Parliament did not perform its oversight functions the way it should have, or effectively, obviously I've got to say, why was that so? And it may well be that if part of the evidence that you have given and the other witnesses have given is true, that the ruling party itself may be responsible for a certain share of blame as to why its own members of parliament might have felt that they were limited in a very serious way in properly discharging their oversight functions. Would you like to comment on that, or not really, Dr. Khoza?
Your observation, Chairperson, is absolutely correct, except that I would qualify, I would not say the ANC played some part. In fact, the ruling party is instrumental in crippling, in weakening the parliamentary oversight. I just want to give you an example of 3 women in parliament that happened to live in the same parliamentary village that were engaging from time to time. And that is Zukiswa Daphne Ranto, Feziwe Loliwe, and myself. The 3 of us were very instrumental, I would say, in you know, we were trying to do our best because we were neighbors in the parliamentary village, at the Acacia village. And we would talk about, man, we can't allow this to go on, you know. And independently, though, we took the decision that we took, that we were no longer going to be silent. We were going to try and do what is right. What actually happened to those 3 women is tragic because I was removed as the chair of the Public Service and Administration. First, Loliwe died from a car accident, and she was one of the women that was very, very smart. I respected her a lot because we served with her in the SABC board inquiry, and she was as critical as I was. I subsequently also learned that Ranto, Daphne Ranto, Zugisa Daphne Ranto was also not returned as a member of parliament. Basically, the ruling party, if you are doing your job, they find a way. I am not suggesting they're responsible for place where Loli was there, but I am saying it's something to note that all those that were in the forefront that had no smallanyana skeletons that former Minister Batabile Dlamini spoke of. It was very easy to strangulate their voices and discard them. And that is the unfortunate situation. So other members of parliament, even if they wanted to do it, we are always, even on social media as we speak, I mean, you hear people tell you that it's very cold outside the ANC. If you are not going to follow the ANC directives, look at what happened to Makhosi, and they would cite most of us because it also happens at local government level, at provincial level. People who try to perform a prudential oversight function, they are punished severely. Even their careers are destroyed. And I'm speaking from experience.
Well, the ANC will come appear before the commission. They are cooperating with the commission and filing affidavits, as I understand. I did say it's in the public domain already in 2019 that I had said that the ANC as the ruling party would need to appear before the commission can finish its job, because it seemed to me that it was bound to have to deal with certain matters relating to state capture. When did it start suspecting that there was state capture happening or allegedly happening? And what did they do? What could they have done? Did they act at all? Did they not act? And what about the levels of corruption in the country? They have been rising for quite some time. What did they do? They were the ruling party in parliament. They were. They had. The executive was their executive, so to speak, and it was the president of the country was the president of the ANC, and there were all kinds of allegations concerning him and the Gupta family and state capture and corruption. What did they do about all of these things? Particularly if they were giving instructions that their members of parliament should not perform their oversight functions properly. Were they giving those instructions because there was something effective they were doing within the party? Or was the position that they were giving those instructions, but within the party they were also not doing anything, and therefore allowing state capture and corruption to happen? So they will come here. They will put their side of the story, but it is quite concerning, because if the ruling party was giving instructions or conducting itself towards its members of parliament in a manner that was sending the message to its members of parliament that it's wrong to perform your oversight functions the way you are supposed to do. It's wrong to perform your oversight functions properly. You shouldn't call an ANC minister to account. You shouldn't criticize a member of the executive who was not doing their job, or against whom there were serious allegations of corruption and other things, because then the message was, as long as you were a minister in the ANC minister, you shouldn't really take the committees of parliament seriously, because the majority would always be ANC members, and you would always know that in terms of the instruction of the party, or in terms of various pronouncements by leaders of the ruling party, you would, members of the party in the committee that you have to deal with are not supposed to be vigorous in performing their oversight functions against you, because you are an ANC minister. And therefore, if parliamentary oversight failed to stop corruption rising to the levels to which it has arisen, if parliamentary oversight failed to stop various acts of alleged state capture happening, it may well be that in part, and you might say not in part, you might say 100%, it's because members of the majority party were hindered or impeded from doing their function properly. And if they had not been hindered because of the instructions and the attitude, the approach taken by the ANC leadership, maybe they could have stopped some of the things that this commission is looking at. Maybe they would not have happened at the level at which they seem to have happened. Maybe the billions of rands of taxpayers' money that this commission has heard about that were taken away through corruption from government departments and SOEs, maybe it would not have been so many billions if the members of parliament who are in the majority party were allowed to perform their oversight functions against the executive properly and were not hindered. You might want to say something, or you have said enough.
Well, there's just one thing that I would like to recommend, if I may. You know, I really do think that Parliament is such an important institution in terms of curbing the rampant culture of corruption that we see in the country. And I honestly do think that if we had some of the committees of Parliament, like whether it's finance, the Standing Committee of Public Accounts, the committee, the Integrity Committee, chaired probably by the opposition, as opposed to being chaired by the ruling party, I think Parliament will be functioning better and it will be performing its role. I'm selecting those specific departments, those specific committees of Parliament, because they are cross-cutting. And if you have those as a standard, that they should be chaired by the opposition, it's not necessarily to take away the responsibility of the ruling party, but it's our experience in South Africa is that the ruling party, whether it's the ANC or another ruling party for that matter, it cannot be the player and the referee at the same time. And we need to find the mechanisms of ensuring that there are those mechanisms. And so that members such as myself and other members of Parliament of the ANC who wish to do right and cannot do right, they need to be able to go to the Integrity Committee of Parliament. But the problem is that the Integrity Committee of Parliament is also a committee of, it's the ANC that decides who becomes the chair of that committee. So you can't go to anyone. You are basically helpless as a member of Parliament. You wanted to do good, but unfortunately you are constrained. And maybe that is something that we might have to consider going forward, so that the ruling party does not have absolute power or absolute control, because we can see, obviously, from the evidence that all these things would not have happened. All these billions of rands would not have been stolen had Parliament been empowered to do its role, and had the ANC not had absolute power over the executive and over the legislature. Thank you.
And I guess the one thing that would be clear is that if the ruling party was really intolerant of corruption and wanted proper oversight to be performed by members of Parliament, effective oversight, the Parliament could have stopped a lot of things that have happened that are wrong. And anyone in the executive, including the president, if the ANC came to the conclusion that these ministers and this president are not doing right, the ANC could have either recalled them in terms of their internal processes outside of Parliament, or if they had allowed their members of Parliament, ANC members of Parliament, to really perform their functions of oversight over the executive, using their own judgment. It may well be that they could have done much more, or they could have done a lot, and members of the executive would know. Even members of the ANC will support a vote of no confidence if I don't change, or if I do A, B, C, D. But if those in the executive, including the president, knew that I can't be touched as long as the ANC is with me, it will give instructions to members of Parliament to say, you can't vote in favor, you can't vote with the opposition, even if you think that the motion of no confidence is in accordance with the interests of the people of South Africa that you represent as a member of Parliament. Then ministers and the president who would feel comfortable to say, well, all these motions of no confidence are just a waste of time, because the members of the ANC members of Parliament who are in the majority will be told you can't vote with the opposition, even if in your own judgment voting in favor of the motion would serve the interests of the people of South Africa better than voting against it. But because the party says you are not allowed to vote for what you believe is right in terms of the interests of the people, then you don't vote, and you vote against it, but actually you are being unfaithful to your oath of office as a member of Parliament when you do that, because the oath of office, in the oath of office for members of Parliament, when you take that oath, you say you promise to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa. So how are you faithful to the Republic of South Africa when, in your view, the right thing for the Republic of South Africa is to vote in support of the motion of no confidence in the president, but your party instructs you to vote against it? Your party instructs you to actually act in breach of your oath of office, because you have looked at the situation and you believe that if you are to act in accordance with your oath of office, you must vote in favor of this motion of no confidence. But your party says, forget about what you think. You didn't bring yourself to Parliament, but they allowed you to take this oath. They were in support of you taking that oath to say, in performing your functions as a member of Parliament, you will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa. And as the Constitutional Court said in the secret ballot judgment, the oath doesn't talk about being faithful to the party. It talks about being faithful to the Republic of South Africa. And I guess the framers of the Constitution knew that at the core of your function of your role as a member of parliament lies the interests of the republic. Yes, your party might have brought you there, but your oath says you must be faithful to the Republic of South Africa. But if you are instructed to vote in a way that doesn't accord with what you believe is in accordance with the interests of the Republic of South Africa, then it seems that it's problematic. But the ruling party will come and maybe they will explain their perspective, and maybe one will understand something that one might not be understanding now. But what do we do, Dr. Khoza, about this problem? Because on the one hand, there is the issue that you are brought to parliament by your party, and in terms of the current electoral system, when you campaign not for yourself as a member of the party, you campaign for the people to vote for your party. It's the party that gets elected. When does one say, let's leave it to the electorate to decide how to punish the party if they do something that the electorate doesn't support? Are you able to deal with that?
Yes, I think there's already a constitutional court on a judgment on that matter, especially regarding the electoral system that we have in South Africa. All that has to happen is for the ruling party primarily to ensure that it is implemented. At the moment, when you become a member of parliament, there's only one way of becoming a member of parliament. It is through a proportional representation system. There is no directly elected members of parliament by their constituencies. We needed to make, this thing is very important because even though we have a state of paralysis at local government level, and as a local government practitioner myself, I know for a fact that ward councillors have more power over the party because they represent their constituencies. Hence, if they resign from the party, there has to be, if they resign from the municipal council, there has to be by-elections. But at national level, you are really constrained because you've come through the party ticket. They can fire you at any time, and there are no consequences. And so I am saying the Constitutional Court judgment on the electoral reforms, I think it's got to be something that has to be implemented because it will go a long way in ensuring that at least half of the members of parliament will be accountable to their own constituencies if we were to follow the recommendations of Franca Slabet a report, because they are already there. In fact, even his commission did a lot of work insofar as that is concerned. And I think it will help a great deal because then members of parliament will be able to vote with their conscience, or they will be able to vote in accordance with the mandate that they are getting from their constituencies, as opposed to getting an instruction from Wetemantashe, sometimes even unlawful instructions, and you are forced to go for that kind of instruction. I think that will help a great deal to me, that will be my submission, Chairperson. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to
Yes.
speak, and I think it was good that I came forward.
Yes, no, you did a very good thing. I just want to make one point arising from what you have said. I think it may well be that I haven't refreshed my memory on the judgment of the Constitutional Court about allowing independent candidates or people to stand for Parliament. But what seems to be important, among other things, is that in order for members of Parliament, particularly of the ruling party, but it would apply to any members of Parliament, actually, any members of Parliament, to really play proper and effective oversight role, to exercise their functions of oversight without fear, is that they must know that there is no threat to remove them from Parliament. So if, for example, in terms of the constituency system, I know that even though I'm a member of a particular political party, so let's say ANC in this case, I know that when I know that members of my constituency are happy with my work, with my job, with how I perform my oversight functions in Parliament, and they will vote for me as long as they are happy for me. Even if I defy the instruction of the Secretary General of the ANC to say, in that no confidence vote, don't support the no confidence vote. If I know on my reading of the views of the people in my constituency that actually they would like me to vote in favor of that motion, I can vote in favor, because as long my being in Parliament is not just dependent on the Secretary General of the ANC. I can always get voted by the people in my constituency. So in that way, I would know that if I go against this instruction that I think is not in the interest of the people of South Africa, it doesn't mean the end of my parliamentary career. As long as I act in accordance, I satisfy my constituency that I'm doing a fine job, they will elect me next time. Even if the party were to fire me now, maybe next time the people will elect me. If there is a by-election, they'll elect me and I'll come back. Or maybe they can't fire me for it. They can do whatever, but when it comes to who will represent that constituency in Parliament, as long as my constituency is happy, I will be able to go to Parliament. So, but at the moment, members of Parliament have to really weigh quite a lot. You were saying that they always said it's very cold outside the ANC. So you think if they fire you, or next time when there are elections, you are put very much down in the list, you won't get elected. So you have to think about all of those things. It makes it difficult. You say it seems better to just comply with the instruction, and then in that way I don't take too much of a risk. But in the process, then the proper performance of oversight functions is not done. And because it's not done, the levels of corruptions that we have seen happen, and then we know all the evidence that has been had by the Commission about looting and so on. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Khoza, for coming to give evidence. We appreciate it very much. I know that it was not easy, but we really appreciate it very much. Thank you very much. You are now excused.
Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Freund?
Chair, I have a witness who I believe is probably immediately available, and another witness after that, but I think we'll be lucky to get through one more witness if we possibly can.
I'm able to sit beyond 4 o'clock. How is your situation, and do you know what the witness situation is?
I can't say as to the witness, but my own situation, I can go all night.
Okay, no, that's fine. And what's your estimate of how much time we need for the witness?
Judge, that's extremely difficult to say.
I won't hold you to it.
Imagine an hour and a half, something of that order.
An hour or hour and a half?
Yes, that's at best.
No, that's fine. Then we will get through. We will get through. As long as the witness is available, we can finish. But I would like us to take a short adjournment before we start with the new witness. 10 minutes adjournment. We adjourn.
Hello, Mr. De Freitas. Hello? Mr. De Freitas, can you hear me?
I can.
Will you be taking the oath or the affirmation?
I'll take the oath.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Advocate Freud, LLSC. Oh, there you are. Okay, we're gonna resume shortly again. So I was just preparing yourself.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
We are about to begin, so I was just trying to make sure that you're there.
Yes, thank you. I'm ready, and I believe the witness is ready.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Mr. Freund. Mr. Freund, you may proceed. You may call your next witness.
Thank you, Chair. I call as the next witness Mr. Manuel de Freitas.
Yes, Mr. De Freitas, are you there?
Yes, yes, I am, Chairperson.
Okay, you are not on the screen yet. I understood that when you speak, you come on the screen, but this is not, it's not happening this time. I don't know whether it means you must speak. Okay, you speak up. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Chairperson.
Yes, thank you for coming to assist the commission. Thank you very much for availing yourself. We appreciate it very much.
Any pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Registrar, please administer the oath or affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Manuel Franca de Freitas.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
I have no objection.
Do you consider the oath binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you, Mr. Freund. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this witness has presented voluminous written material to the Commission, which in due course I will seek to have admitted as Annexure ZZ12. It starts in Volume 3 at page 306. It goes through from 306 to 836, and then it also comprises a substantial portion of Volume 4. Mr. De Freitas.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Mr. Freund. You said it starts at Volume 3 at page 306. I guess you mean Bundle 3, is that correct? Or not really?
Bundle 3, I'll just check again. I believe that is correct.
I've got his affidavit starting at 317.
317, yes.
No.
The page before that is just the sort of cover page indicating the exhibit number.
Yes, okay.
Perhaps,
So,
if I might, Chair, just take the witness to this brief confirmatory affidavit and then all will become a little clearer.
yes, but we, just for the record, you confirm that it's not 306, but 317 where his affidavit starts.
That's absolutely correct. That's where the affidavit starts.
Okay, all right. You may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. De Freitas, you will have heard that exchange. And have you received from the Commission a hard copy of your own submission paginated in accordance with the Commission's pagination system?
I have, Advocate, I have.
So you will know that what we tend to do is to refer to the pagination on the top left. If we're in Bundle 3, then page 317 would be the first page of your confirmatory affidavit. Do you have that?
I do indeed, thank you.
And can you confirm that that brief affidavit is your affidavit and that that is your signature at page 320?
I confirm.
And have you had an opportunity to check that affidavit? Are you comfortable with the contents of the affidavit?
Yes. There may be some grammatical mistakes and so forth, but nothing substantial.
Thank you. Now, what we see when we look at that affidavit is that you annex, and this is at page 317, you annex marked A, a copy of your curriculum vitae, and is that what we see at page 322?
Yes, the brief one, yes.
I'll come back to that. And then what we see in paragraph 4 is you say, I annex here to marked B, a copy of a report that I prepared for submission to the Commission. And is that the report that starts at page 323?
It is indeed.
And that report, its main text, goes through to page 456 in Bundle 3. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct, yes.
And then in addition to that, you have furnished a substantial volume of annexures that are referred to in the main text of your submission document, the Bundle B document. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
That comprises the rest of Volume 3 and a substantial part of Volume 4 of the papers before the Commission at the moment. Chair, against that background, I request that we admit into evidence Exhibit ZZ12.
The affidavit of Mr. Manuel, Semayof, Franca de Freitas, which starts at page 317, is together with its annexures admitted as an exhibit and will be marked as Exhibit 22, Exhibit ZZ12.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. de Freitas, is it correct, as appears in paragraph 1 of your confirmatory affidavit, that you are a member of Parliament?
I am indeed.
And you represent in Parliament the Democratic Alliance, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you have furnished to the Commission a very brief, what we call a political curriculum vitae, which we see at page 322. Would you turn to that, please?
Yes.
And can you confirm that that is a fair summary of your public?
Yes. Yes.
And what it shows, in short, if I may draw particular attention to it, is that you were a member of the Fourth Parliament from 2009 to 2014, during which period you served as Shadow Deputy Minister of Transport and thereafter Shadow Minister of Home Affairs. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And in the Fifth Parliament, you were re-elected, and you served for the duration of that Fifth Parliament from 2014 to 2019 as Shadow Minister of Transport. Is that correct? And in the time that you served as Shadow Minister of Transport, is it correct that you served on the Portfolio Committee on Transport?
Indeed, yes. Correct.
And is it correct that that Portfolio Committee is responsible for oversight of various entities, but for present purposes, those entities included PRASP?
That is correct, yes.
That's the...
Sorry, Mr. Freund, Mr. De Freitas, if you could speak up a bit, some of your answers to the questions were not audible. Yes, okay, all right. Try and speak up.
I apologize. I'll do so, Chair.
What you make...
Advocate, I was just saying PRASA stands for the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa.
Yes, thank you. And then what you explain in paragraph 4 of your affidavit is that you prepared this submission report, which we're going to spend quite some time dealing with in due course. And you say in paragraph 5 that the report is in the main based on your personal experience as a member of Parliament, particularly as a member of the Portfolio Committee on Transport. Is that correct?
Yes, during the periods that I was a member of that committee, I'm talking about my experiences during those periods. So there was a break between 2012 and 2014 when I was in a different committee. So, but otherwise it is my experience.
Right. And then you say in paragraph 6 that you've refreshed your memory by making extensive use of documents and hypertext links referred to in the report, and that those include summaries of the meetings of the Transport Committee prepared by the Parliamentary Monitoring Group, and that to the extent that you've relied on either the PMG summaries or the hypertext links, you believe them to be reliable sources. Is that correct?
That is correct. Over and above that, I keep copious records of everything. So I did have an external hard drive that I referred to, and that's where the various annexes come from. I've kept record of all these things. Yeah.
Now, I just want to digress briefly to get your views in respect of the reports by the Parliamentary Monitoring Group. You say in paragraph 7 that you regard them as the most reliable and extensive available records of the proceedings of the Transport Committee. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, I do. And if I may elaborate, is that if you look at the minutes prepared in Parliament, not just for my committee, but any of the committees, they really don't serve much. It's almost like a tick box exercise to say there was a meeting, these things were discussed, and that's it. It doesn't dig into the substance of what happened in those committees. And so PMG, the Parliamentary Monitoring Group, is a more reliable source because they actually, note who said what, at what time, and the debate is a lot deeper in those minutes.
Now, those minutes by the PMG do not purport to be like Hansard. They do not purport to be verbatim records. But in your experience, are they generally a fair reflection or a fair summary of what takes place?
I think overwhelmingly they're a fair summary. I think the problem in Parliament is that it suits the party that's the majority for detail not to be there in their official parliamentary minutes, because much of the debate and the information could be quite damning and implicates a lot of people. And so it is suitable for them to have kind of a summary, very summarized minutes. And luckily we have organizations such as the PMG who come in and do detailed records. And so when I was preparing the submission, I had my own records, but certainly PMG assisted me in reminding me, in jolting my memory and so forth in things that happen in committees.
I think the PMG would be very keen for me to stress, and I put this to you for your comment, that they endeavor to be non-partisan. They're not a campaigning NGO type organization. They're trying to produce a reliable, objective set of records.
That is exactly why they are I value them, and they are respected, because they should be non-political and non-partisan. And that is why everyone can refer to them knowing that there are no party political agendas behind their work.
Now, in paragraph 8 of your affidavit, you refer to not just the PMG's general reports as a resource, but a very particular resource that has been made available to this commission. You say, I have read and considered the report prepared by the PMG for submission to the commission entitled Parliamentary Oversight over the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, which you call the PMG report. Chair, if I could indicate for your convenience that report is or will be in due course, one hopes, Exhibit ZZ 8.2, is to be found in Bundle 2 from pages 825 to 875. It will be introduced formally through the evidence of a representative of the PMG.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Mr. De Freitas, against that background, if we can turn to what is strictly speaking Annexure B1 to your affidavit, but in substance is really your submission to this commission. And that starts at page 324, am I correct?
Correct.
And perhaps you could read into the record the title of the submission, because it gives an oversight as to what you've tried to do.
Yes, thanks, advocates. It's quite a long one. I'll just read what I've put in front because, as you say, it is a good summary. It's submission by Manny de Freitas to the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption, and fraud into public sector, including organs of state. The effectiveness or otherwise of parliamentary oversight in respect of alleged state capture or corruption, particularly as regards the manner in which the Portfolio Committee on Transport dealt with allegations pertaining to PRASA during the 4th and 5th Parliaments.
And what you've endeavored to do in this extensive report and the even more voluminous annexes is to give quite a detailed overview over quite an extended period of that issue that you describe in the title. Is that correct?
Yes, and it is voluminous, and I subsequently then summarize it before I finalize it. And the reason why it is so voluminous is whatever I said and whatever the chairperson will read in my submission, I want to be in a position to totally back up. I don't, where it is my opinion, I state so, and where certain things I claim to have happened, I use backup information that are in the annexures. So that is why it is so voluminous. I don't want, and I wanted to mention specific examples of what took place throughout this period, so that it is concrete and not kind of academic or anything else. That is a real concrete, sequential, chronological, series of events that took place that we can pinpoint.
Now, Mr. de Freitas, I mean no disrespect to you and the extreme extent of the effort you made, but I'm going to start at the fifth Parliament, and for present purposes and because of questions of time before this commission, I'm going to omit in your oral testimony reference to the fourth Parliament. And I'd like you to start, please, at page page 369, which is at the foot of the page, page 46 of your report.
Yes.
We are truly pressed for time, so I ask you as far as possible to be crisp and brief in your answers. But what you do in this page and the page that follows is you refer to an issue which arose about the so-called Class Afro 4000 locomotives and concerns that arose in respect of procurement at very great public cost of a set of locomotives. Could you just, in one paragraph, summarize what was the gist of the issue here?
Well, let me just say that before this information was made public, I had a whistleblower who had warned me of this. And the information was it sounded so ridiculous that I half didn't believe it. And every time I've worked with whistleblowers, I've always made sure that I get information first, that I don't make accusations. And so what I did is I submitted questions about it. And the whistleblower had said to me that the incorrect height of trains, the incorrect locomotives had been ordered, and they weren't suitable for our rail environment in South Africa. And so I immediately submitted official questions to back up this claim. This person could not give me anything in writing. They just knew the information. They could give it to me verbally. So that was the gist of it. And it obviously the story broke before I got the reply, and it broke into the newspaper. And that I was then in a position to then really kind of push the issue after that, because it was public news. And then it was more than just me perhaps making a claim unsubstantiated. There was something in the media that I needed to follow up from.
All right. And before we move further with that issue, I'd like to refer you to the foot of page 370, because there was another issue at about the same time, which you referred to Mr. Daniel Ntunkulu,
Yes.
and his qualifications, which you say had been found to be fake. If you could just crisply summarize what the issue there was.
So the story broke about the incorrect heights of trains, in the beginning of July, and literally a few days later, another story broke that an official whose name was Daniel Ntunkulu, who was the head engineer, effectively, if PRASA, who was the person who would have signed off on the actual dimensions and actual engineering of these locomotives, was actually not an engineer and wasn't qualified to have done this work.
And then if I can refer you to page 371, towards the middle of the page, under the date 14 July 2015, you refer to two letters that you wrote to the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee. That was the Portfolio Committee on Transport, am I right?
That is correct, yes.
You've already told us that's the Portfolio Committee of which you were a member and which had responsibility for oversight in respect to PRASA.
Yes.
The chairperson was one D. Magadzi, is that correct?
That's right.
And in those two letters, you say the first letter was a request to summon Minister Peters before the Portfolio Committee to explain this matter, and you refer there to a particular annexure. That's the issue about the locos that you've just described, is it?
Yes. Yes. I had asked for her to appear. I can't remember this sequence, but the replies to questions that I'd asked then came back, and I'm not sure if it was before or after this letter, but I think it might have been after, and she, at that stage, said the dimensions of the locomotives were correct. And then later, anyway, it's a side story. She stuck to the fact that it was the incorrect dimensions. And so I'd asked the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee to call on the minister to explain this matter.
Right. And then you wrote a second letter, and you give the reference in the bundle, to request that Mr. Nkulu be summoned to appear before the committee to discuss the same matter, which is really the matter of the local orders and their size specifications and the like. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And you say in your report that in both instances, receipt of your correspondence to Makhosi, this is the chair of the Portfolio Committee, was confirmed and was covered extensively in the media, but you say that you received no acknowledgement nor response of any description from Makhosi. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Sorry, just for the record, do you know the first names of the chairperson Makhosi?
It's Dikeledi.
So I didn't hear that clearly.
Dikeledi Makhosi.
Dikeledi. Thank you very much. And then you say, in addition, these matters were never tabled at any meeting of the Portfolio Committee, despite your approaches to the Portfolio Chair and the Portfolio Committee Secretary about them. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, these issues throughout the whole of Parliament, the rail and PRASA, the rail infrastructure was imploding. All sorts of things were going on. And it was if the Portfolio Committee was in a bubble, as if these things weren't happening. And they were completely being ignored, as if we would come to portfolio committees and kind of follow a program that had been set, and all the news of the day were kind of ignored.
And then on the next, at page 372, under the heading 30 July 2015, you deal with what I think you were alluding to a moment ago, the responses that you received, or the response that you received from the then Minister Dipuo Peters to written questions about these locos, and you were told the dimensions were correct and so forth. You say, with the benefit of hindsight, although that's what she said, she was wrong.
Well, by then I knew that was the case. It was extensively covered in the media, and new developments happening on a daily basis. And so I then tabled a motion in Parliament saying that the minister be referred to the Powers and Privileges Committee, because essentially she had lied, which is a very, very grave transgression of anybody, let alone a minister. And of course, that motion was not, was not passed. The ANC blocked that.
Well, you say, of course, as though we should all know that such things would never happen. Perhaps you could just elaborate on that a little.
Well, yes, that's a good point. I mean, in an ordinary parliament and in a functioning democracy, correspondence will be responded to from no matter who they are, whether it's the opposition or whatever the case is. And these kind of requests will be considered very seriously. The culture that developed, and I know you're not referring to the fourth Parliament, but if you look at my entire statement, I start off in the fourth Parliament very naively, believing that correspondence will be responded to, that if there's any transgressions that are identified, that they would, the government would look at and pursue. I very quickly realized that that's not the case. And in fact, they spent most of the time trying to, prevent any exposure of any transgressions. They tried to block the information that was available. And any actions that I tried to undertake was simply ignored. And so that became the culture. Letters of correspondence would just be ignored. And to a point where I would actually ask the chairperson in the corridors informally, and she said she would acknowledge that she got it and that she would respond in due course, which of course she never did.
So I hope I wasn't unfair to you, because you would understand the pressure the Commission's under on time grounds. You have summarised, as it were, the impressions you formed during the fourth Parliament. Is there anything in particular that you think we should be drawing the attention of the Commission to as to the events in the fourth Parliament, or are you content that we should move on in the fifth Parliament?
Yes, well, I mean, the fourth Parliament, you can see the very quick, not slow, very quick destruction of rail and PRASA as an entity. And it starts off in a much better position. And year by year, the Auditor General and all sorts of other organizations confirm that it is collapsing. And nothing was done about it. The warning signs were there. And no, whether it was the board, whether it was anybody else, did nothing about it. And I kind of at times felt kind of the only person shouting in the middle of a desert, and nobody seemed to be listening. And we're now at a stage where it is completely decimated. So that's really the story of the Fourth Parliament. And I then started to look at other ways of trying to bring attention to and try and fix this entity.
Now, you've referred to the deteriorating financial position of PRASA. There has already been evidence before the Commission through the evidence of Mr. Temba Gordy, but alluding to an unsigned affidavit by the late Auditor General, Mr. Kimi Makwetu. And you have had an opportunity in preparation for your evidence to go through that affidavit, that draft affidavit, fairly carefully, as I understand. Is that correct?
Yes, I have, yes.
And the Auditor General, the former Auditor General, paints, in my view, a disturbing picture of progressive financial deterioration and progressive deterioration in controls and progressive deterioration in adherence to the core prescripts that govern procurement. Would you concur or disagree with the picture painted in that draft affidavit?
Well, I concur completely, and everything that he said is backed up in Auditor General's reports, which were tabled in Parliament year after year. And it was available. In fact, we would every year on an annual basis call in the Auditor General and have these voluminous financial records in front of us that just showed a constant, continued destruction of PRASA. So there was nothing in hide. There was nothing hidden away. It was public knowledge. Very difficult to kind of keep monitoring. I was able to on a constant basis keep careful records of where the entity was, because I believe particularly quite strongly in rail, and I believe that rail should be the backbone of any public transport system anywhere in the world. And in countries that's so been done, they've got the best transport systems that they're able to move around. And so it was there in black and white. There were no secrets. This is not news. And if members of the Portfolio Committee did not know about it, it's because, quite frankly, they didn't read this material.
Now, I'm going to come back later in your evidence to this very topic of the Auditor General's report, the effectiveness of the Portfolio Committee's oversight. But it's helpful that you just give us that brief introduction because it puts in context the bigger picture when we look at the points of detail that I'm going to be taking you to. And the first point of detail that I now wish to take you to is referred to at page 372. I think we were at that page. And you'll see under the heading 11th August 2015 that on that date, the Public Protector, at the time, Advocate Maronsela, issued her report into PRASA called Derailed. This over 390-page report revealed details of a total failure of delivery and governance. I think that's your wording. Tender contracts had been improperly awarded and extended to the tune of hundreds of millions. Now, I take it that you became quite familiar with the content of that report.
Yes.
And would you like to elaborate just very briefly on what you think the main takeaway is from that report as you read it then in August of 2015?
Well, I mean, it was unbelievable information. Again, public information issued by the Public Protector at the time, and detail, with absolute detail, mentioning dates and times and names, specific names of companies, of individuals. So there was it wasn't an ambiguous report. It was an incredibly detailed report, which a lot of research had been put into. And in fact, at the end of that report, the Public Protector at the time said that they would be releasing a second derailed report, which never happened. I'm not sure why, but certainly I would imagine you could easily prepare a series of derailed reports. And essentially the report talks about mass looting, about how people were taking an opportunity to self-enrich and rob the state, in this case PRASA, in whatever way they can through making sure that tenders were issued to certain people, that prices were inflated, that procedures weren't followed. So in order for this, it was clear in the report, which is what I've been saying before the report, is that in order for all this corruptions, looting to have taken place, there would have had to have been a network of corruption. There would have been a network of a hierarchy of people to be able for this to happen. Because if you are, in order for you to be corrupt, you need other people to help you fulfill these corruption activities. So that was the gist of what the public protector was talking about. A lot of the work had been done. Parliament could have just taken that information and moved on with that.
No, I thank you for that, but I do want to refer you to the top of page 374, where there's just one point of detail that I think is perhaps significant, is that although this report was issued as we said, in August of 2015, the report itself makes clear that it arises from 37 complaints made to the public protector by the South African Transport and Allied Workers Union. This was a union complaint about PRASA, and the allegations were made in 2012. And so by August of 2015, those allegations made in 2012 are investigated and reported on. The point being that this indicates that the rot goes back a long way.
Yes. Yes, and that's exactly the point what I mentioned earlier, is that in the fourth Parliament, I could see as a newcomer and not knowing the department the way I got to know the department, it was clear that something was underfoot. The numbers weren't adding up. Strange practices was clear were taking place. And very quickly I realized there is a network of corruption, of people allowing this to happen, and it would have to come all the way from the top for all sorts of huge worth millions to be able to have been passed when they actually were not the suitable tenders, for example. So I very quickly caught on that this is what was going on. So it did take a while to realize what was going on. And also, as more and more people got to read stuff that in the media, I started being approached by whistleblowers, people who wanted to talk to me quietly and in dark alleys and so forth, to give me information. And that helped a lot, and started putting the pieces of the puzzle together very quickly.
I don't need you really to repeat what you've said, but I'll just draw attention to the fact that a lot of what you've just said appears at page 374 of your report. And I'd like you now to go to page 378. And perhaps if you could just read into the record under the date 23 February 2016, just what happened on that occasion?
I, on that day, we had a plenary on that day in the National Assembly, and so I tabled a motion, requesting that we debate what I described the shambolic state of PRASA, and what the causes of this state was, and what needed to be done to change this, to get fixed. I think this might have been, this was one of many similar motions. I'm not sure if this was the first. I'd have to check my records, but I made a similar motion throughout the Parliament, throughout the two parliaments, similar motions requesting that this be debated.
And this occasion...
one second, Mr. Freund. Mr. De Freitas, to the extent that your report might not reflect all the motions that you are talking about that you made, I would be interested in knowing the various dates for the motions, because it may well be that members of Parliament ought to have taken your motions seriously, and maybe they didn't, and that's why the motions did not succeed. And because one of the things we are looking at is in regard to what matters was Parliament supposed to act because they had knowledge or a reasonable suspicion that there was something wrong happening, but they did not act. So in those circumstances where a member of parliament did put a motion that was aimed at addressing some of the problems, but parliament might have not given that motion the attention it deserves, that might be important. So to the extent that your report might not cover all of those attempts, those motions, I would be interested in you giving Mr. Freund more information about when and what the motion was about and what happened to it.
Thank you, Chair. I attempted to list every time I tabled a motion in the House in this,
Yes.
In my affidavit, but I will just double check that in fact I have covered every motion. I may have missed one or two because there were
Yes.
quite a few. I tried to table the motions at least every few months because
Yes.
the state of PRASA was getting from bad to worse. But may I just say, Chair, you were talking about, to the extent that people or other members of Parliament were not aware of the state of PRASA or rail. All they had to do was to go to any train station anywhere in the country, and they would just see for themselves, which I have, by the way, talked about later on in the affidavit. So they didn't have to look for, anything academic or anything complicated. They just needed to go and visit train stations, be there at 4 a.m, as hard-working, ordinary South Africans were trying to catch a train, and talk to them, and they would tell you how they suffer on a daily basis, and how many of them lost their jobs because of the train system that wasn't working, and how they would have to get there early in the morning so that hopefully 2 hours later, they may well catch a train or they may not. So this was happening on the ground. There were no secrets. This is not hidden away. This is not stuff that wasn't around. It certainly was happening on a daily basis and continues to do so.
Yes, the point you make is fine, but the fact that you put before the National Assembly motions is important in another respect, namely those who may not have taken the trouble to go to train stations and see what was happening. When you put in those motions, they would have seen that you were calling for certain things to be done, and if they did not support or did not take those motions seriously, and they hadn't bothered to go to train stations to inform themselves, then the situation is quite serious. Because at least if you didn't go to the train station, but once a motion is put, you give it proper attention, you take it seriously, and you take steps to inform yourself before you decide whether to support it or not to support it, that's important, because now it's put in front of you to say there is a problem. So if you reject it without doing the homework that you should have done, then it's even more serious. But thank you. Mr. Freund?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. De Freitas, maybe if I could add to what the Chair has requested. It is true that there's a great deal of detail in this submission, but it would be extremely helpful to the Commission if we could furnish a relatively short additional document, which just focuses in particular on motions put to the House, and in particular to why, if you think that is the case, the members of Parliament ought by the time of the various particular motions, ought to have been aware that there were issues worthy of the attention of the House. That would be extremely helpful. Would that be in order? Thank you. Now, can I take you now to page 381? And I'd like to focus firstly on the date. I'm interested in the 8th of July, 2016. Now, let's try and put that in context. Ms. Matsoni has testified earlier this week about a whole series of matters that were in the public domain, which prompted her to request the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises in March of 2016 to pursue an inquiry which she was unable to procure. And then she talks about, and Ms. Ranto, who's testified, has talked about events going back to 2011 and further, well, not further, but from 2011 onwards. And so there was a climate by March of 2016, according to the evidence, of some considerable concern about what you might broadly call the state capture issue and allegations relating, amongst others, to the Gupta family. All of that had happened before the 8th of July 2016, and you would have been familiar with it, I imagine.
Yes, yes, I am.
Now, in that context, you refer at page 381, in the second paragraph, to a Sunday Times story that was published on the 19th of June 2016, with details of a 51 billion rand tender for the purchase of 20 new locomotives by PRASA, which involved the Gupta family and Mr. Duduzane Zuma. And the allegations included, this is the allegations in the Sunday Times report, that the Gupta family had attempted to rig the tender process so that they would benefit. And other allegations included statements made in the media by the previous PRASA GCEO, Mr. Lucky Montana, about who alleged or who claimed that he was introduced to the Gupta family and associated by previous Transport Minister, Mr. Ben Martins, and that the Gupta family wanted their associates to sit on the PRASA board. So that's what has appeared in the press. In the context of that, you say in the first paragraph that you wrote a letter to the chair of the committee, Ms. Magadzi. You say it's Annexure C010. Would you please turn to Bundle 3, page 485?
Yes. Yep.
Is that the letter to which you are referring in this paragraph of your report?
Um,
A letter of the 8th of July 2016 from yourself to Mrs. Magadzi.
yes, yes.
Got the right-
485. Sorry, page 485. Yes,
Bundle 3, page 485.
yes, that's correct. Yes.
Here, I can't see you on screen. Have you had a chance to find that?
Yes, yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Thank you.
I found it. Yes.
Chair, can I just check that you have also been able to find it? I don't see you on my screen.
Sorry?
I'm just checking that you've managed to find the reference, page 485 in Bundle 3.
Excuse me, I did find it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
In that letter, Mr. De Freitas, you request that the Portfolio Committee on Transport launch an inquiry into this 51 billion rand PRASA tender process. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
And you assert that that Parliament, acting through the committee, has a duty to act under Section 55(2) of the Constitution. You say that Parliament must use its power to launch an inquiry in this matter immediately. And you say the Gupta brothers and Duduzane Zuma should appear before Parliament to account for this highly irregular conduct for which they stand accused. Should Parliament determine that there were irregularities in this regard, Parliament is duty-bound to refer these transgressions for criminal prosecution. I look forward to your soonest response in this regard. Did you get a response from Ms. Magadzi?
I got no response. I must just say that I wrote the letter in context of, as you said, it was big news at the time of how a family was influencing the state quite considerably. But also this contract, this tender was worth 51 billion rand. it's a lot of money. And so, yes, I wrote to the chairperson and received no response.
And you say in the third last paragraph on page 381 that you again inquired about your letter with the PC chair, who acknowledged the letter and said she would address it. She never did. Do you stand by that?
I do. And throughout the time, my experience was that she would, in your presence, kind of say she'd address a matter or she would respond to it and fob me off. And that I describe, as you'll know, a little bit later in the other inquiry attempts.
Right. Now, if you, just to get your bearings, would you turn to page 387, and you will see that there is a description of a meeting that started on the 7th of March. You'll see that in the middle of page 387. And you'll see that that meeting really continued on the 8th of March. And that you will see at page 66. And it goes right through to about 390. Now, we don't have time to go through all of this, but perhaps you could describe to us the first day of this two-day meeting, the 7th of March, which was a meeting with PRASA about the state of PRASA, and just give us the highlights.
Yes, this meeting turned into a two-day meeting because there's so much to discuss and so much to do that it turned into a two-day meeting. During that time, big news, again, the media had exposed or released the fact that the acting group CEO, Collins Laswaya, had got himself a 350% salary increase. And so that matter was discussed, and matters to do with PRASA in general, you know, and how and the state of PRASA. And that went on for 2 days. And by the end of those 2 days, it was so obvious to everybody that some kind of investigation was required, some kind of inquiry. And for something that I've been fighting for quite a while, by the end of the second day, I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, when one of the ANC members made the proposal that an inquiry was necessary. And I could hardly believe my ears. And in fact, I asked the chairperson to confirm that this was in fact the case. And she said, yes, we need an inquiry into PRASA at the end of the second day.
Now let's just go through that, focusing on certain aspects in particular. Can I take you to page 388? Second paragraph.
Sorry, Mr. Freund. Sorry. Can we have a 2 minutes adjournment? Nobody must go anywhere. It will really be 2 minutes. We adjourn. Oh, Mr. Freund, are you there?
I'm here with the chair.
Okay.
Mr. Freitas,
Okay.
Can you come back on video?
Okay, we can proceed.
Just want to check, Mr. De Freitas, are you hearing me? I think Mr. de Freitas is perhaps not back with us yet.
I'm sure he's going to.
I'm sure he'll be back with us shortly, Chair.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, are you waiting for me? Sorry, I took a body break as well. Sorry about that.
Oh, well, I was about to say, you might have thought that 2 minutes would be 5 minutes. Okay, all right, let's proceed.
Thank you. Mr. de Freitas, at page 388, the second paragraph, it says that Mr. Malodzi of the EFF and Mr. G. Khadebe of the ANC called for the suspension of the, quote, corrupt, unquote, board and a comprehensive inquiry into PRASA. Now, I want to pause there and just to place this in context, because the Commission has heard evidence quite some time ago about the preceding board, the resignation of the preceding group chief executive officer, Mr. Lucky Montana, the appointment of a new board chaired by Mr. Popo Molefe. And when we read here about a call by Mr. Khadebe for the suspension of the corrupt board, by that time we are referring, are we not, to the board chaired by Mr. Popo Molefe?
Yes. So there was clear shenanigans going on behind the scenes. And I realized very quickly that the reason why they wanted an inquiry were different reasons to why I would have wanted an inquiry. But I felt it was an opportunity anyway, because once you start an inquiry, you're very difficult to hide anything that needs to be exposed. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to get rid of Popo Molefe, that's the bottom line, because he started exposing the rot that was going on in PRASA. He appointed investigators to start investigating, and information started coming out which left many people uncomfortable. And so you'd see throughout this time, there were two big villains that ANC were trying to create. The first was Popo Molefe, and then they started holding on to the company that was doing the investigations, Worksman's attorneys, who that became the other enemy. And so they tried to divert attention from the real issues into how much was Worksman's being paid, that kind of thing. So that was the context, and that was clearly, in my view, the agenda that the ANC members had to launch such an inquiry.
Now, I understand that there has been evidence before the Commission that there is room for argument about whether proper processes were followed in the appointment of Worksmans. I'm not expressing a view one way or the other, but there's room for debate. That's not my question. Yes, carry on.
What I was going to say is that they may well have a case. The way that Worksman's was appointed, and that should be a subject on its own. But I believe it's a convenient argument because it diverts away from the real issues. Because the reality is that Worksman's was exposing all sorts of corruption and dirty laundry. They were not just allegations; they were proper investigations with real backup behind that. And that made certain people very uncomfortable. So that may well be the case. And maybe Popo Molefe did appoint them incorrectly. And that should be addressed. But what about all the information that Worksman's was exposing? And at not one stage at any of the meetings whenever I brought that up, I said, well, let's deal with that. But let's then look at what Worksman's is exposing. And at no stage did they want that exposed, which was interesting. And obviously it was a way of hiding the information that was being exposed. Sorry.
Well, that was really the point that I was trying to move towards. And let me ask the question generally. Did the Portfolio Committee, in your judgment, at any stage, show appropriate interest in whatever it is that Worksman's claimed to have exposed?
Well, let me answer directly by saying I unambiguously said, let's look at what Worksmans have exposed. Let's get them in. Let's get them to provide us some kind of report, which I happen to know they would have been very happy to do. But there was no interest at all in getting Worksmans or anybody else that was investigating. I don't hold a brief for Worksmans. I'm interested in exposing the corruption and bringing out the truth. But at no stage was there ever any attempt, even when I requested so, to bring anybody to come and explain to the committee.
Now, I want to take you to page 390, third last paragraph, before the heading Peters fires Pross aboard. And I'll just read that into the record. At the end of the second day of hearings, that's the 2 days you've been referring to, the committee unanimously agreed that it undertake an investigation into PRASA and the problems that it was currently confronting. The terms of reference and other details would be discussed in subsequent meetings. The motion to initiate an inquiry into PRASA was reconfirmed by myself at that meeting. The Parliamentary Communications Service issued a statement echoing this, and you give a reference to the official statement was issued coming out of that meeting that there was to be an investigation, an inquiry into PRASA. Is that correct?
Yes, in fact, you remember just a minute ago explained that at the end of the 2 days, I could not believe my ears. And so I asked the chairperson, are you saying you want an inquiry? I want to understand this is correct. So I made it, I clarified it absolutely. So it wasn't a misunderstanding. I specifically asked the question, and it was confirmed that we will launch an inquiry after many attempts from my side for it to happen, and I was very hopeful that day.
So if we look at the next paragraph of the same page, page 390, before the end of the meeting, the Department of Transport Acting Director General, Matabata Makonyama, read out a letter that had been sent to the committee from Minister Dipuo Peters in which he dissolved the board of PRASA. I take it that was a dramatic moment.
That was, and I felt like I was in a Hollywood movie, I must tell you, because, we confirmed that there's an inquiry, and then suddenly this official out of the blue wants to speak and essentially fires the board. And it leaves me completely confused, but immediately I'm sensing there's something going on behind the scenes. So there was this, it really was very dramatic. And so the meeting ended, it wasn't discussed, the letter wasn't discussed. It certainly took wind out of my sails. It was quite amazing, quite an amazing day. Yeah.
I should take you now to the next page, 391. There's a paragraph that deals with the date of 14th of March 2017. Perhaps you could tell us, with reference to that first or second paragraph under that date, what happened on that occasion?
So the very next week we have our portfolio meeting again. This, these 2 days happen, and then there's the weekend. And so the next Tuesday we're meeting, and suddenly the room and the atmosphere is completely different. It's as if I am in a room with completely different people, and in fact I say so in the meeting. Suddenly in this meeting, the ANC say there is no need for inquiry. It's not necessary. The minister has now fired the board, and therefore there's nothing to discuss. That was the argument line. And I literally took the wind out of my sails. And my colleague and I, who's on the committee, was on the committee with me, expressed to them how it was as if they weren't there the previous week. And they acted, as if it's fine, we should just move on, and no inquiry is necessary. And I was completely gobsmacked that this was the case. And I said as well, that's clear that Luthuli House has got to each of the ANC members, and they've been instructed not to continue this inquiry. It was clear. And obviously it happened over the weekend.
Now, reading the documentation, one gets the impression that the reason relied upon for not proceeding with the inquiry was precisely the fact that the board chaired by Mr. Popo Molefe had been replaced, as though that removed all need for any further inquiry. If that's the excuse proffered, what's your comment on that excuse?
Well, that's exactly the excuse they used. And I said, but it's irrelevant, quite frankly, who's at the helm of this thing. The problem is that it doesn't take away what is going on. It doesn't take away the destruction of our rail system, the looting that is clearly going on. All this is happening anyway. So again, it was a not clever way, but I would imagine the ANC thought it was a clever way of trying to muddy the waters by putting in a new board and creating a perception that things were going to change and things were fixed, because they had created this enemy in the public's minds in any way, that Popo Molefe was the root of all the problems. And so that was a clever way of, so they thought, of getting rid of him, and suddenly PRASA is clean. And I said to them, this is absolute nonsense. These issues are still continuing. The looting and the corruption is still going on, and nothing's changed.
No,
I'm sorry, Mr. Freund. I'm sorry, Mr. Freund. Mr. De Freitas, just articulate their reasons quite clearly for reversing their stance on the institution of an inquiry. I would have thought that the disbandment of the board by the minister would actually be an additional reason why there should be an inquiry in the way it was done. It seems that, one would have been justified to say, well, all the more reasons why we should have an inquiry so that we can understand exactly what's going on at PRASA. So what were the reasons that were articulated? Was it just that the minister had disbanded the board, therefore there is no need for an inquiry? Was the position that there's going to be a new inquiry, let's leave it to it, or what was the position?
There was no indication of being any new inquiry. What the explanation was that now that the minister had fired the board, things were going to be resolved, things were going to be fixed, and PRASA was going to be in the right track. And we were kind of expected just to believe that. But the real truth is that, that they wanted to get rid of Molefe because he was working very hard to expose what is going on, and it now became almost a weekly event, usually in a Sunday newspaper, where you'd see a new scandal after another involving rail or PRASA. And so it left the certain people in the ANC very uncomfortable. And so the members in the portfolio committee of the ANC were instructed. I have no doubt. I have no proof of this, but looking and reading the room the very next week, when suddenly it was as if I was talking to different people, it was clear that they had been instructed and told that they are to toe the line and to stop this inquiry. And I said this in as many words. I did tell him that, and I said it was absolutely shocking that they're putting party ahead of the country, and so they had obviously planned this discussion. They didn't argue or debate with me. They just kept very calm and collected and left it at that. So they anticipated, I'm guessing, that I myself and my colleague would have created some kind of outcry, and so that's what happened on that day.
no.
So I guess that maybe then your evidence that your reasons for wanting an inquiry and their reasons for wanting an inquiry were different. With them, once if the reasons for the inquiry or the objective was to get rid of Mr. Popo Molefe or his board, then their need for the inquiry had fallen away, but your need for an inquiry was related to finding out what was causing the problems that were being talked about in regard to PRASA.
Chair, you're quite right in that unofficially, behind closed doors, they wanted to get rid of Molefe and anybody that was exposing any maldoing. But the point is that in the meeting, the two-day meeting the previous week, the reasons that were given by the ANC were the same reasons that I was supporting. So even, if, you know, that wasn't meeting what they were saying. And so I'm not sure if it was all a pretense, but as part of a grander scheme to then just stop an inquiry. But then my question is, why even propose such an inquiry? Because the proposal for an inquiry in this instance came from the ANC. I didn't even think of it on the day to, you know, ask for an inquiry, because I had tried before, and I was quite happy for the rot to be exposed, so that it would add more credence to any future inquiries that I may request. So it came from the ANC, and my reading, my suspicion is that some of the ANC members tried to do the right thing, and over the weekend they were very quickly told to stop it, and that would explain a complete different demeanor the very next week.
Mr. Freund?
Yes, thank you. Can I take you back to page 388, please?
Yes.
In the fourth paragraph that starts with the words, although I agreed, there is a sentence in the fourth line that reads as follows. They, which is a reference to the ANC members on the Portfolio Committee, were angry with Popo Molefe for speaking out about allegations of payouts to ANC coffers, a cardinal sin, I think that should be, it's a typo, for the ANC. Would you just elaborate on that, please?
Well,
and you say that they were concerned about that, and how important an issue was that in their desire to push Mr. Molefe's board out of office?
One of the many things that were coming out that Molefe was exposing were allegations of payouts into the ANC and so forth. And in fact, there was a newspaper article, again, one of the famous Sunday Times articles, the very previous week, if I'm not mistaken, exposing this kind of stuff. And so and that, according to the ANC, is a cardinal sin. You don't go and dirty and muddy the organization. Organization always is ahead of the country. That is always the case. And so that Molefe had committed the most cardinal of sins. And so in their eyes, they needed to get rid of him because he was now a persona non grata. And if I'm not mistaken, when Dr. Molefe addressed this commission a while back, he alluded to similar things, if you may remember. So certainly he had become an enemy of the ANC, according to them, because he had, as I say in here, he had betrayed the ANC, and that's something you never do in their eyes.
Now, I want to take you to page 397, please.
Mm-hmm.
And the material you deal with dated the 15th of August, 2017. Yes. And you refer there to the fact that you had been alerted by your then chief whip, Mr. John Steenhuisen, about a letter that had been written by the House chairperson, Mr. Cedric Froelich. And I'd like to take you, if you could stay at that page, but also have a look at bundle 3, page 518.
I didn't hear the first page, Mr. Freund.
Bundle 3, page 518, 518.
The first page.
Yes, page 518 in
Okay.
bundle 3.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, I've got it.
Now, there, it's a letter not to the chair of your own committee. It's a letter to the chair of the Portfolio Committee on Mineral Resources. But it's a letter to the chair of that committee requesting an investigation into allegations of state capture. Now, is that the letter to which you are referring here at page 397 that Mr. Steenhuisen told you about the letter to the chairperson of the Mineral Resources Portfolio Committee?
Yes, my chief whip at the time told me that a letter that had been written to a number of committees, including the Transport Committee, requesting that state investigations be undertaken by these committees. My chief whip didn't have the specific letter addressed to the Transport Committee, but the one that I've put in the file here is the one he had. And I said to him, but this is to someone else, and he said the contents of the letter is exactly the same. It's just that it went sent to the different committee chairs. And in fact, I informally, at one stage, much later on, did confirm with the chairperson of the committee that she had received such a letter. And in fact, I'm correcting myself, it was unofficial, but then I did mention it when we were discussing an inquiry later on that year. So she certainly did receive the letter, but I've never had the letter addressed to her. And this is the copy that I've had, and my chief whip had confirmed that it was the same throughout.
If I can just pause you there, because we rather run ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
So Mr. Steenhuisen told you that he believed there was in existence a similar letter to the chair of your own committee, the Transport Committee. Is that correct?
He was advised by Cedric Frolick
Right.
that Mr. Frolick had written to all these chairpersons.
Now, that letter that was alleged to have existed, I don't believe is annexed to your presentation. But Chair, may I refer you to bundle two, I stress, page 488. That is an annexure to Ms. Matsoni's affidavit. You may not have this, Mr. De Freitas.
Registrar, bring the file. Yes, I've got it, Mr. Freund.
Thank you, Chair. Now, Ms. Matsoni testified, and I may say that this evidence will be confirmed in due course by Mr. Frolick, that Mr. Frolick wrote the letter we see at page 488 on the 15th of June to Ms. Makhosi, the chairperson of your committee. And it asks her, on behalf of the committee of which she was chair, to investigate allegations of state capture in organs of state in relation to PRASA. And it's similar to letters sent to 3 other committees. Now, my question to you, Mr. De Freitas, is whether Ms. Makhosi ever revealed to the committee that she had received that letter?
She did not. No, she never did. And I was the one who then asked her about, did she get any communication from anyone about looking into this matter? And not at this stage. It was later on when we were looking at terms of reference when we were going to do an inquiry, which never happened.
You're talking about a period we're yet to come to.
Yet to come to, yes.
What you call the third attempt at an inquiry.
Yes.
Let's just be clear about the chronology that you talk about. You've already testified about the attempt that you made in mid-2017, referring to the 51 billion rand contract and the refusal to inquire on that occasion. You've already testified, and that's what you call the first occasion. You've already testified about a second occasion in which there was agreement to have an inquiry, but then that was not pursued for the reasons you've referred to. We're now after that so-called second attempt. We haven't yet come to the so-called third attempt, and we're dealing with something that happened in the interim. And in the interim there is evidence from other sources that this letter was sent by Mr. Frolick to Ms. Makhosi, and your evidence, if I understand correctly, is at that time she did not reveal to the committee that she had received such a request. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct. She did not reveal anything. I did informally, in a diplomatic way, because I hadn't, that letter was not addressed to me. And I wasn't, it wasn't addressed to me, so I didn't want to appear as if I was reading her mail, put it bluntly. And I said to her informally, in a roundabout way, asked her about it, and there was nothing forthcoming. So the short answer is no, that letter was never tabled at the committee.
Now, you do say this at page 397, the last paragraph under the date 15 August. As I was officially not aware of such a letter, I raised the subject as diplomatically as possible. I explained that I had heard of a letter requesting us as a PC, that's a portfolio committee, to initiate an inquiry into PRASA. The chairperson of the PC explained that PRASA itself was undertaking their own inquiry and that other agencies such as the Hawks were also involved. Her argument was that essentially this precluded us from launching an inquiry. I argued that this was not the case and that we are at liberty to investigate PRASA as Parliament has oversight on government. Can you confirm that that is correct, what I've read into the record?
Yes, and in fact, you'll see later on that in one of the replies to to one of my questions, the minister at the time says that PRASA has a problem with the information exposed in an external investigation, and so the information had to go back to satisfy PRASA. And my argument is you don't check with PRASA. They're an interested party. They're part of the problem. You don't go and confirm this. So it was a similar argument here, in that there were other inquiries taking place, and therefore we should not worry. And you've put the case exactly right. I said to her that shouldn't preclude us from investigating and exposing this information.
And let's be clear. No, I won't ask that question. Can I now refer you to page 401 of Makhosi?
Yes.
So there is a debate that takes place at a committee meeting to discuss implementation of the derailed report requirements. The derailed report is the Public Protector's 2015 report. It required various things to be done. It had resulted in the board under Mr. Molefe appointing worksmen to do certain forensic investigations. It had resulted in the Hawks doing certain investigations. It had resulted in National Treasury doing certain investigations. And by this time, by November of 2017, the Minister of Transport is one Mr. Joe Maswanganyi. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. He was a previous member of the committee.
Well, that was the point I wanted to come to. So a member of your committee who had sat with you in the committee and had been party to the events that you've just described was now wearing a different cap. He had recently been elevated to the position of Minister of Transport. Is that right?
I must tell you, the corridor talk, it's not in my affidavit, but the talk amongst other ANC members were, with me, surprise, that he would have been picked to be the minister. And secondly, that he wasn't the obvious choice to have been picked. And there were members in the ANC who couldn't understand it because there were better options. So that was the corridor talk. But my sense is that he was in the right faction that was in control, and so he was needed there.
Now, if we go to the next page, 402, again, in the time I'm going to try to avoid dealing with too much detail, but we see there from the middle of the page onwards, Mr. Khadebe's comments, Mr. Ramatlakane's comments, and so forth. We see that this concern continues to be expressed by the ANC MPs on the committee about the fact that Worksmans is pursuing an inquiry, and the impression one gets reading the PMG report on this and other meetings is that as far as the portfolio committee was concerned, the majority of the members of the committee, There was really only one concern. It was that money was being spent on Worksmans and very little interest in what, if anything, Worksmans was coming up with. Did that remain the case as we read here as at November of 2017?
Yes, it remained the case, and in fact, it intensified the campaign, if you like, to vilify Worksmans and the amount of money that they were being paid and how they were appointed and so forth, intensified. And at every opportunity in the Portfolio Committee, the ANC spoke on about it, and I tried to swear or bring back the conversation into what is the state of PRASA, and let's look at what Worksmans is actually producing. And they, kind of cut that off every time.
Let me move forward then to page 409.
Okay.
Now you will see that there is a section that starts in the middle of the page, but that follows on from what we see at the preceding page, just to get our date bearing. That's the 12th of January 2018. And I'm not interested in the first letter referred to. I'm interested in what we see at the middle of page 409. And you say, I use the letter, which is the same letter that you've been referring to earlier in this report, to also note that the committee should also scrutinize the recent appointments at PRASA. Both the acting group CEO of PRASA, Cromit Molepo, and the acting CEO of Rail, Mthutuzeli Swartz, had multiple allegations of corruption and maladministration that had been lodged against them. And then you say at page 410, the second paragraph, despite confirmation by the PC Chair's office of receipt of my letter, I received no response to it. When attempting to discuss my letter with the PC Chair, I was fobbed off. Could you please elaborate on this incident?
Yeah. So I had, in fact, before even writing this letter, I received a call from a whistleblower and telling me about these two appointments. These appointments have a long history in local government, in government entities and so forth. And the long and short of it is they have been involved in all sorts of scandals of, incorrect misconduct and so forth. That's the gist of it. So these are not fellows that you should appoint to a failing entity. And so I requested to the Portfolio Committee Chair that we look into this, and and again, no response.
Can you turn now, please, to page 414?
Yes.
There's reference there to a Transport Portfolio Committee meeting on the 13th of February 2018. And when you read, you will see that this was the occasion on which an NGO going by the name of Unite Behind was afforded an opportunity to make a presentation to the Portfolio Committee. Do you remember that occasion?
Yes, I do. Yes.
And there has been evidence before this commission already about the stance taken by Unite Behind. And apart from complaints that they made about what you might call service delivery and operational problems, they also made allegations of state capture and corruption. And when they appeared before the committee on the 13th of February 2018, there was a case pending before the court, before the High Court, a few days later than that, between United Behind and PRASA. And it says here, in the second last paragraph at this page, although the United Behind brief included state capture, governance, and an emergency safety plan, the acting chairperson, Mr. Ramatlakane, ANC, said the committee would not deal with the state capture matter because it was not part of the agenda for this meeting. So can you confirm that although they permitted Unite Behind to make a presentation, they simply were not willing to listen to anything that Unite Behind had to say about the allegations of state capture and corruption?
Yes. They allowed Unite Behind to talk about the state of rail and its, the infrastructure that's failing and so forth. But as soon as anything to do with state capture or certainly looting and corruption, they were cut off. And that is a common tactic that was used throughout the period in various committees. If it wasn't absolutely explicit on the agenda, it was a convenient way of not discussing a matter. And so, as I mentioned earlier, you would remember that the committee was as if we were in a bubble where all these things are happening with rail and with PRASA, and we seem to be being disconnected as a committee. And here's an example where really pertinent issues of the day, important issues that need to be discussed and exposed, were kind of cut off. And so that's the kind of, this is an example of the bubble I described earlier.
Now, in many of the presentations and affidavits submitted to the Commission on the Parliamentary Oversight issue, some of which have not yet been led in oral evidence, there's an ongoing theme that emerges about the question of matters that are sub judice. In other words, something to do with the matter is before some court somewhere. Would you just comment generally on whether that presented in your experience a problem in attempting to do what you regard as appropriate oversight?
Yes, no, all the time. There are always matters before the court, especially when it came to PRASA. And so at every opportunity when debate needed to be cut, they used this sub judice rule, which was applied incorrectly, by the way, but was always conveniently applied, to suit their means. So, and that happened more times than I can remember. And that was a way of just preventing discussion and taking matters further.
I'd like to take you now to page 415. And really, I'm going to try to cover very briefly what you deal with at quite some length between page 415 and page 424 or page 423. But this is what you call the third attempt into a parliamentary inquiry, and you commenced this story on the 20th of February 2018. Now, could you maybe just summarize and give us the highlights of this attempt and, as I understand it, decision to pursue an inquiry into the affairs of PRASA?
So by that stage, the financial reports, which had to be submitted to Parliament by the end of September, of PRASA, the financial reports of PRASA, had not been submitted. And so, as you rightly said, in February, this information has still not been submitted, which is a grave problem. And so that's kind of what led to eventually the committee agreeing that an inquiry is required, and that it conducted an investigation. I'm just trying to remind myself of the dates here, but we said...
I can just interrupt you and take you to page 415, the third last paragraph, starting with Mr. L. Ramatlakane.
Yes. So, I can't explain the change of heart, but certainly it was very big, in the news. It was spoken about much because there was total failure of PRASA happening all around. And so I'm hoping that would have been the reason, but the long and short of it is that PRASA needed to be investigated, and there was agreement. And I was very hopeful and very excited that this was going to take place. So a subcommittee was formed, comprising Mr. Ramatlakane and Mr. Hunsinger, to look at the terms of reference into the inquiry and so forth, and to report back to the committee.
Now, before you proceed, if I can take you to the top of page 416.
Yes.
I know that you've said that often the approved minutes are too brief to be helpful, but this is an extract that you have provided here from the official minutes. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's exactly why I put it in here. It's unusually, accurate. Yes.
So it says PRASA investigation. The committee took a resolution to launch an investigation into the alleged malfeasance at PRASA. in terms of National Assembly Rule 2271C. And then it says, as you've just alluded to, the terms of reference would be drafted, and those terms of reference had to be completed by the 22nd of February 2018. And there was, as I read it, an unequivocal, absolutely clear, absolutely unambiguous decision. There is now going to be an inquiry into alleged malfeasance at PRASA. Is that correct?
Yes, and in fact, at this stage, when I saw that actually it was in black and white, it was terms of reference were going to be drawn up, we'd never got this far. We'd always, you know, as you've heard earlier, it was got to a point when suddenly all collapsed. So I was quite confident that at last something was going to happen because we had got to the stage. So yes, this is correct. And this is an exact extract from official records.
Now let's just try and get our sense of timing once again.
Yes.
By this time, the present Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture had already been appointed.
Yes.
That was known to you and to everybody who participated in taking this decision to proceed with this particular inquiry. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. It was big news. And we often we would refer to the existing inquiry and say, you know, we should do something similar as well because nobody's looking at PRASA. You know, these other inquiries are looking elsewhere.
Right. Now, if I can take you to page 420. Perhaps I should take you to the foot of page 419.
Yes.
The official Portfolio Committee minutes of the meeting confirm that the terms of reference for the inquiry were proposed by Mr. Ramatlakane and seconded by myself and was agreed as follows. 1. The inquiry will investigate governance, procurement, and the financial sustainability of PRASA. The inquiry will look into, amongst others, Sub 1, appointment of permanent board members and executive management. I just want to digress to say that you deal at length in this report with the problem of the appointment of a so-called interim board and the litigation that followed on Mr. Molefe's board's removal and then reinstatement and what followed. That's part of what you were concerned about, but we haven't touched on that in your oral evidence today. 2, alleged procurement irregularities, as indicated in the Public Protector report, derailed. That's the 2015 report. Finally now, in 2018, February, this committee wants to get to grips with that, as well as allegations made of procurement irregularities with regard to modernization, as well as rolling stock projects dating back to 2012. 3, allegations of impropriety regarding PRASA's current acting group CEO, as well as past group CEOs dating back to 2012. And then on it goes. Item 7, consider worksman's appointment process and scope legality, and then other related matters. I haven't read all of it into the record, but I've highlighted those that seem most pertinent for present purposes. And if I can then, so I take it you can confirm that I have read from an extract of the official terms of reference.
Yes, yes, this was tabled in our committee, yes.
And then if we go to page 421, you've, at this page and at later pages of your report, you have creatively inserted in color various extracts to show an official program and schedule. And you make the point in the middle of page 421, an inquiry planner schedule was agreed to unanimously. The inquiry planner divided the inquiry or investigation into 5 stages, starting with phase 1, and this is the point, on 16 May 2018, and concluding with phase 5 on 26 October 2018 as follows. And this isn't just something that you were dreaming up, this is a decision of the committee as I understand it, is that correct?
Decision of the committee, and what I've done, as you described quite creatively, I've got nothing to do with the creativity. This was a literally cut and paste taken from the official records and which I've inserted in here. And I've done this on purpose. Again, the reason why my affidavit is so long is because I wanted anybody to, I didn't want any space open for anybody to say that I'm not telling the truth. And so I've, for convenience and ease of reference, I've inserted all this information. So this wasn't my work. This was one of the officials that had tabled this program. So, you know, and all I've done is I've just put it in here to prove, in fact, that we got to a point where we have approved terms of reference, and now we have a planner. I remember clearly how we were saying we can only do it later on that year because we had a whole lot of different things in the legislative program which we'd had to deal with in Parliament, and so it would only have happened at that stage from mid-May.
So let's just look at, if we can go to page 422, you see within your written submission.
Yes.
Although the terms of reference
I'm sorry.
for the inquiry into process,
I'm sorry, Mr. You say if we go to 4.2
422,
or 422, the next page. Okay.
the next page, and Chair, immediately below the colored calendars, the first written paragraph.
Okay, thank you.
Although the terms of reference for the inquiry into PRASA was finalized at the 13 March 2018 PC meeting, the PC was advised that it was not made available to the public as the terms of reference had to first be submitted to the chair of committees, Mr. Froelich of the ANC. However, my understanding was that the inquiry would proceed as advising Mr. Froelich was simply to keep him abreast of developments. Is that correct?
Yes. My impression was, and certainly the impression given, was that it was just a mere formality to advise Mr. Froelich as the chair of chairs. And I, at that stage, thought nothing of it. You know, I thought, well, we've got to follow processes, and he is the responsible officer in Parliament when it comes to these kind of things.
And then at page 423, under the heading 20 March 2018, there's a reference to a revised time schedule.
Yes.
It says, you say in your report, at this meeting, you give a reference to the PMG minutes, a revised inquiry schedule with an additional oversight in May 2018 included in the planner was provided to the members of the PC, which indicated that phase 1 would start on 22 May 2018 instead of the initial 16 May 2018, and still concluding phase 5 on the 26th of October 2018. That's correct, is it?
Yes, yes. And I again insert in the affidavit an exact copy of what was tabled with the new dates.
Now, if I can take you to page 428.
Yes.
Because there is, if I may say so with respect, a bit of an omission in this particular submission, because you see you deal with the 8th of May and you deal with the 30th of May, but we have just seen that the inquiry had been scheduled to start on the 16th of May. That's at page 100.
Yes.
But that didn't happen, did it?
It didn't happen. And in fact, in my affidavit somewhere, I started realizing that excuses are starting to be made, because I kept on asking, well, you know, the date is approaching. What are the arrangements? You know, what are we doing to actually get this inquiry going? And, you know, are we calling in witnesses and so forth? And I could see the appetite was losing very quickly. And my reading was something is going on behind the scenes, and someone is trying to either, you know, prevent this from happening or delaying it or something. I could sense that something wasn't coming right. You're right that in that page I don't mention it, but I do mention it somewhere else.
You certainly do. I'll take you there immediately.
Yes.
So if you go to the foot of page 429,
Yes.
you deal with the meeting that took place on the 5th of June 2018. Are you with me?
Yes, yes.
If you turn over the page, in the third paragraph, you say, I reminded the committee that it had agreed to undertake an inquiry into PRASA. The chairperson replied that PRASA was aware that the PC would be undertaking a parliamentary inquiry into PRASA. Although the PC had planned to start that work in July 2018, which is of course later than what we've just read, The parliamentary programme had been adjusted due to Parliament's extended recess. The PC chairperson said that the PC would want to engage with the other boards within PRASA, such as the Intersite and Autopax boards. She advised that the PC would communicate with PRASA board as to when the inquiry would commence and what the terms of reference would be. Well, I thought we already had terms of reference, did we not?
It's exactly that. And it was at that meeting that I realized, the penny dropped, if you like, that I realized something's afoot. They are, keep on pushing. Throughout the whole time, because it was supposed to have started in May, kept on asking about this inquiry. And, eventually, I think, this is what came out. And I started to smell a fish. It wasn't right. And then, as if, we make decisions and then, they pretend that these things haven't happened. What's bad for them is that I am completely obsessed with keeping records of everything. And I suspect they may not even have half these records that I've got, because there's nothing I throw away. So I keep every single record that I have. And so I know for a fact that the terms of reference were agreed to, and suddenly they're changing their story. And I don't talk about it in here, but certainly I express my displeasure about how this is being manipulated and being pushed away, because suddenly a piece of legislation which has been waiting for 10 years is suddenly very urgent. And,
I can just with that point, we can move on to the point you now make.
Yes.
What you say in the next paragraph at page 430 is you say, no commitment was ever subsequently made by the PC chair, Lady Magadzi, about a commencement date for an inquiry. Excuses continued to be made as to why an inquiry could not take place. The main excuse being the lack of time to undertake such an inquiry and the need to pass urgent, in quotes, legislation. In both instances, you say this was not true, as the committee programme could have been amended to accommodate an inquiry in the same manner that the PC for Public Enterprises had done for their inquiry, as in reality, there was no urgent legislation pending. Now, I'd like you to talk to that in a little more detail, please.
So it became very clear that they were, again, something must have happened, I'm guessing, something must have happened behind the scenes, and they were told to delay, or because I'm guessing they realized they've now committed, it's in black and white, to undertake such inquiry, and so they had to find a way of it not happening, and so they delayed and delayed. Suddenly, a piece of legislation which isn't urgent, it's been sitting for over 10 years, and in fact, it's legislation that we don't need, called the Road Accident Benefit Scheme to replace the Road Accident Fund, suddenly became very urgent. Suddenly, it had to be passed in this Parliament before rising. And so a whole program of public participation, where we would travel the entire country, was tabled, where they said we need to go to every province, we need to go to a number of cities and so forth, to undertake public participation program sessions about the Road Accident Benefit Scheme. And I immediately knew at that stage this was to crowd out the calendar and to ensure that there would be no time. Conveniently, they then said there's no time, but they created that situation to make sure that there was no time to initiate an inquiry.
And you make the point at page 430, at the end of the second last paragraph. Your point was that the RABS was not urgent, has been confirmed as this Parliament has agreed to completely scrap it. Is that correct?
In fact, in one of the first, obviously I'm not part of the Transport Committee committee anymore, but my colleague, remained on the Portfolio Committee, Chris Hunsinger, and he very successfully, very early on in this Parliament, was able to convince the rest of the committee that this was a piece of legislation and wasn't required. And luckily, I think he is he's very convincing, and some sense prevailed, and they completely scrapped this bill completely. Which proves the point. It's not even needed, but they needed an excuse to crowd out the agenda.
Now, Mr. de Freitas, that completes what I want to deal with you on the sort of chronological following of your report. But I'd now like to take you back, if I may, to pages 339 through to 3:45. And again, I am aware that time is against us, but you deal with some important issues there. You deal with some problems that experience has taught you that characterize portfolio committee oversight in practice. And then you deal with other techniques that can be used as other than the portfolio committees themselves. And then you make certain proposals. Now, the chair will no doubt have an opportunity in due course to read all of this, but I think this is your opportunity to try and highlight those that you think most pertinent. So let's start with your points about portfolio committees in practice, and if you could just highlight what you think are the main points in the sequence in which they appear here, and where necessary, if you can briefly, but only briefly, elaborate on them.
I've just mentioned that I found it interesting that Dr. Khoza, the previous witness to me, mentioned something similar, and that is we've got a situation where in Parliament, all the chairpersons of committees are from the party that is the majority party, excepting for Scopa. And so that's one of the problems, in that you have one party who dominates and runs all committees. And so there is a lack of accountability and transparency. And certainly my proposal is that we perhaps on a proportional basis, based on the strength of your party, that there be chairpersonships given to different political parties so that there be a balance. And it would certainly, I think, increase and improve accountability and transparency. Then also, I mean, there's a lot that I do talk about, but certainly, for example, the debates and the way they're designed is designed in such a way that the minority parties and opposition parties have minimal speaking time and can only participate in a limited way. And so that should be looked at, and it keeps them getting gerrymandered by the ANC to accommodate them. And I think that's a very dangerous precedent. Then certainly there are a whole lot of rules and so forth that get ignored and circumvented and so forth. And we mentioned the road accident benefit scheme, and when we wanted to table our final report, the rules state quite clearly that you're entitled to include a minority report, but yet the committee fought very hard and didn't allow that, and tried to kind of pretend that it wasn't in the rules. Then one of the other, I mean, there's so many, but the other point that I do want to talk about is certainly the minutes and the actual administration in Parliament are not the greatest, and that should be beefed up. And certainly support for MPs. There is so much going on that it's very difficult to keep abreast of a portfolio at times. And so, I was lucky enough to have a portfolio partner, and so we split the portfolio between the two of us. But even so, it's very, very difficult, to really keep abreast and make sure there is accountability. I must just say that I found, in my experience, is that particularly members of the ANC, many of them don't come prepared to meetings. They don't. They arrive in many cases. I've seen them open their envelopes with the documents for the first time. And have not read the information that's been provided to them. And I know that because the questions they ask that would not be asked had they read the material, had they prepared for the meetings, had they done research and come in prepared. So really what the ANC do is they're just interested in having some talking heads, people who will just do the bidding. And that is what you have in Parliament. And it's very sad because Parliament's been denuded of any real talent and can make a big difference. Then it has mentioned earlier, as Dr. Khoza also mentioned, I think that our electoral system needs to be changed. The Funzel Slubbert has some good points. We've got some proposals, which I've also included in the document, which I feel would assist in making sure that there is more accountability with real people on the ground. As far as I know, I was the only member in the portfolio committee at the time that actually went and visited trains on my own. And went to talk to people, to passengers and so forth. And certainly the minister can't claim that he or she at the time, depending which minister was on, didn't know about these things, because then I'm saying why are they ministers then? They should know about this stuff. And certainly our president knows about it, because he himself was stuck in a train during the campaign in the last during the election campaign, in the last election campaign. One of the things that I've done, I've learned, is that there are many tools at the disposal of MPs that can be used very effectively, and I've been able to use them quite effectively in the work in then leading up to laying charges, for example, and so forth. And that is the very famous written questions, where a member of parliament may write written questions for written reply by a minister. The fact the rules say that you've got to respond within 10 days is a different matter. It never happens. The ministers have no respect for these rules. But certainly that I eventually do get replies. And I've also learned to circumvent some rules. The rules in Parliament, for example, say that you're permitted a maximum of 3 questions a week. It's illogical. It's completely arbitrary. I don't know why that is the case. So what I've done is I've asked colleagues who would not be submitting questions that week if I may use their name. And so that explains why you'll see in the annexures, some questions are asked by someone else. They're actually my questions, but I've used someone else's name, a colleague with permission, to use so that I am able to put in more than 3 questions, because I had so many going on every time. If I had to keep it to 3, it wouldn't go anywhere. But the problem to that is you may find a situation I've had often where ministers would not respond, entirely, correctly, fully. And so I would have to do follow-up questions and kind of zone in, laser in even deeper to make sure that I get the answer that I'm looking for, because it was a constant cat and mouse game, which still continues to be. There's a whole list here, but you say I've got to concern myself with time. I did use opportunities for oral questions, which provides an opportunity for direct interaction with the minister in the House, and to put him or her, at a situation where they've got to respond. However, usually the speaker would try and curtail a debate. Their replies usually are very bad and pointless, and the speaker at the time, or the House chair at the time, would defend those members, which defeats the whole point of what questions are about. Yes.
Mr. Freitas, when you say they were very bad or pointless, what are you trying to convey?
Well, when you want to ask, you're asking a question, so you want a real answer, and they would answer in a very, general way without committing, for example, any particular answer, without giving the detail that you're looking for. The rules talk about, you can't ask a question about, detailed stuff that you would, for example, require on a table. But certainly the detailed information about, what is going on in an entity and what is she doing about it, or he doing about it, it would leave very general replies, which really you couldn't do anything with. And so it continues to be a cat and mouse game. But I've also, as mentioned earlier, I've used motions in the House where you're able to actually table a motion and statements as well. And the great thing about that is even if they turn it down, even if they turn down your motion or your statement, it is on record. It is in the Hansard, and it is there that I've asked the question. So if anybody in future that you may interview in this commission denies any of that, it's all on record. And that's very important. That the great thing about Parliament is that these are official records. I just want to the other.
But I think we are concerned about time, and you have made proposals in writing. I'd just like to one last thought, and I want to deal with it extremely briefly. Yes. The question of the affidavit of the late Mr. Kemi Mokwetsi. Now, he paints, if I may say so, a devastating picture of progressive deterioration, and I think you've already said that you concur with what he says, and you say it's all backed up by the Auditor General's reports of the years that are covered by his affidavit. Do I understand you correctly?
Yes. All these records are quite right.
He makes this point. He says he has no complaint about the willingness of portfolio committees, including the Portfolio Committee on Transport, including in relation to PRASA. The willingness of the committees to invite and to listen to whatever the Auditor General thinks should be brought to their attention. It says they're to be commended for their willingness, and it also says they have demonstrated a concern about, for example, hugely increasing, progressively worsening irregular expenditure and the like. But, and I'm now referring to paragraph 249 of his affidavit. You don't need to go there, but it's in volume 4 at page 959, and I'll read to you what he says. He says, although the PC's interrogation of the audited results was visible from the records of the PCs, no real recommendations or corrective action had been noted during the period under review. Furthermore, there was evidence that the PC would request an action or initiative to be taken, but the follow-up thereon was lacking. One example is the audit finding tracking register that the PC requested in the 2015-2016 financial year, yet there was no evidence that the PC regularly followed up this action. And so really what he says is they listen, they don't like what they hear, but they don't do anything effective about it. And in particular, there is no mechanism or procedure to follow up. I'd like to know your comments on that, please.
That's exactly right. All the right noises are made in the committee. Shock is expressed at what the Auditor General presents to us. And we're all in agreement, sure. And I can only agree with Makhosi what he's saying. It's quite right. But there's no follow-up. Whenever you try and press, let's really make some changes, it's as if they are hamstrung. There's a kind of a culture to kind of say we can't really do anything about it. We have no powers. I just believe they don't know how much can be achieved in Parliament if they only allow themselves to do so. But I suspect it's because of the party bosses. They've been given specific, instructions, and so they're following that. And that's a very sad state of affairs, which then is one of the reasons why I'm saying there should be a system where political parties have various chairpersonships in committees, because that'll certainly bring it down and certainly would assist in, even though there are instructions from a particular party, the chairperson of a committee could certainly drive issues anyway if they're from a different party.
I think you make your point in your submission, your written submission, and you've given references to numerous parliaments in other foreign jurisdictions.
Yeah.
One way or another, do facilitate some degree of chairs being allocated in portfolio committees or their equivalents to members of opposition parties. This is not internationally unknown.
Yes, no, in fact, it's very common, actually. It's more common than one would expect. And certainly it only strengthens democracy. But the problem is the ANC don't really like democracy. This is my comments. They believe that the ANC comes first and everything else comes second, including the country. And so as long as they're protecting their organization and making sure that it is their cadres that are protected and come first, that's all that matters. It's a very sad state of affairs.
Mr. De Freitas, I have no further questions. Thank you very much.
May I make, Advocate, may I make just one last comment before you let me go? And that is the following. I'm no longer a member of this portfolio committee, but I watch with interest, because I've been in the committee for a long time, and I watch with interest what is going on in PRASA. And there is more looting now than ever before. And in fact, the chairman of the board at the moment he was a member of the committee, and you've mentioned his name a few times throughout this interaction. And his job is clear. It is to do the bidding of Luthuli House and to make sure that the looting continues. Only this week, and this is public knowledge in the newspapers, there were some officials that were fired by PRASA, by the PRASA board, by the gentleman which I refer. And those officials have saved PRASA billions. They were the good guys. And they are systematically purging all the good people. And, you know, because these people were ensuring that the right thing was being done, that the corruption was being exposed, and that, you know, PRASA was being fixed. And those very people that are doing the right thing are being fired. And only this week, in fact, this happened. So there's no doubt that the looting is continuing. And I'm hoping that through what is happening here at the Commission, that the information that is exposed will somehow start curtailing this hollowing out of rail in South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. De Freitas. Certainly the last part you have told me, if really that is what's happening, and I did hear about the dismissal of somebody who has testified before this commission, I think, from what I've heard, it concerns me, and it concerns me at different levels, one of which is the commission is still busy and hasn't finalized inquiring into and hearing evidence about allegations of corruption and capture at PRASA. And if your information is correct, it's just continuing, and as you say, then it's getting worse. So there is the question of what it is that the commission can do if the executive is not doing the right thing. So it may well be that from the commission side, it could take some steps to try and establish to what extent what you are saying may actually be the case. But of course, the commission is nearing the end of its lifespan, and a lot of its resources is directed at trying to complete the work. Would you have quite some information relating to what is happening right now? I know that you said you're no longer involved as such, but you still have that interest. Would you have quite some information in terms of details in regard to what makes you say it's actually worse now? Do you have that kind of information?
Yes, I do, and I'll gladly pass it on if you require.
Yes, if you could do that, if you pass it on to Advocate Freund, he will share it with me, and if need be, it can be passed on to a member of the legal team who deals with PRASA together with another team in terms of the actual allegations of corruption and capture that may be happening there. But thank you very much, Mr. De Freitas, for availing yourself to come and assist the commission. We appreciate it very much. Thank you. You are now excused. Thank you. Mr. Freund?
Chair, I had another witness who
Yes.
I had hoped to at least start and possibly complete today.
Yes.
He's still available, but I'm assuming that your view would be that we should adjourn round about now.
Well, it depends on a number of things. Tomorrow, I know that in the morning or at some stage we should hear Mr. Self in terms of the previous arrangement, but he wouldn't be long. He would not be long, as far as I remember. Who else, or how many other witnesses are you lining up for tomorrow?
Well, Judge, a number. Mr. Matt Johnston of OTA will be the next witness. His affidavit is lengthy. I will do my best to be selective about what we present orally. After that, I would expect Mr. Froelich probably to testify. And after that, there are at least two further chairs of portfolio committees who would want an opportunity to answer some of the allegations that have been made. And beyond that, there are further witnesses. But I mean, we certainly won't get beyond what I might call the fact witnesses tomorrow.
Yes, yeah. But in terms of fact witnesses, it's Mr. Is it Johnston, then Mr. Froelich, then Mr. Self will just finish what his evidence, complete his evidence.
Yes. And then in addition, we have Ms. Makhosi,
yes,
who has been referred to today.
Yeah.
And then you will recall that Mr. Vincent Smith
Yeah. Changed his
also
mind.
wishes to testify.
Yes.
And I had hoped that we would hear him in this
This week.
current session.
Yes.
So there are a lot of witnesses, but it's a question of what's manageable.
Yes.
I have no difficulty, Chair, if you are content to do so.
Yeah.
Start with Mr. Johnston. His evidence
Yes.
will be quite lengthy. The
Yes.
difficulty with that is that the arrangement is with Mr. Self that he will be the first witness tomorrow morning.
Yes.
So if we started with Mr. Johnston, we would then need to interpose Mr. Self and then go back to Mr. Johnston, but we would at least have made some progress.
Yes.
On the other hand, it is already 6 o'clock. We have been going for quite long today, so I'm entirely in your hands. And I imagine Mr. Johnston is also amenable, depending on how you wish to do things.
I think if you break up what your estimate is in terms of hours for the remaining fact witnesses, what's your estimate? I'm just thinking, and obviously subject to your availability as well, I'm thinking whether there are some that we could hear in evening sessions next week on some of the days, those that we can't get to by end of tomorrow, if we don't get to them.
I obviously can't speak for other persons' availabilities, but my expectation, Chair, is that in all probability, it would probably be possible to arrange several evening sessions in the course of next week. And if that's convenient to you, I imagine it would be possible to fit in at least some of the fact witnesses. You will recall, Chair, that we also have at least 4 what we might call expert and proposals witnesses. We also have Ms. Letsatsi Duba, who is a fact witness, but who's not healthy at the moment. There is also what we anticipate to be the final witness to really speak from the leadership of the African National Congress on the oversight issues. So there is quite a bit more to be done.
Yes,
yes. I am entirely in your hands as to how best you would prefer to deal with that and what hours you would want to operate.
Okay. Let's go back to the question of hours in terms of the fact witnesses again. What's your estimate of how long each one is likely to be?
These are obviously crude guesses.
Yeah, no, I accept, yeah.
Mr. Self, I would have thought no more than half an hour.
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson, I would have thought probably 2 hours.
That's what Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Johnston.
Yes.
Because he covers so much terrain, although I'm going to focus on those parts of his affidavit that are not covered by other witnesses.
Yes.
So 2 hours is fairly conservative in the sense that we should be able to make it in 2 hours, I would hope.
Okay.
Mr. Froelich, a minimum of an hour, but I would have thought longer.
Yes.
And the reason why I say that is because in the absence of the late former speaker, former chief whip, Mr. Froelich really is currently the most senior ANC witness other than the final witness who participates in Parliament and who understands how things are seen from the perspective of senior ANC representatives. So I can't see that we'll be less than an hour. It may be 2 or 3.
Yes.
Ms. Makhosi, I would imagine, relatively short. An hour should be enough.
Yeah.
And Mr. Smith, likewise, I would have thought an hour should be enough. So
Okay.
those are my approximate estimates of what we currently are calling the fact witnesses available for this session.
So apart from Mr. Selfie, it's Mr. Johnson, Mr. Frolik, Mr. Smith, Ms. Makhosi. It's 4.
Those are the ones, yes.
I think your estimates of how much time suggest to me that even making room for the fact that these are estimates, that if we were to start earlier than 10 tomorrow and sit till like this time, we have a good chance of finishing the fact witnesses. What's your sense? That will give us about, let's say, for example, if we were to start at 9 and go up to 6, so that's 10, 11, 12, 1. I know there'd be a tea break, but that's 4 hours. And then there's a lunch break, then it's from 2 to 3, that's 5. From 3 to 4, that's 6 hours. And then if we go to 6, that's 8 hours. And we could go up to upper 6 and so on. What do you think?
Well, Judge, I certainly think that it's possible that we may complete, and that if we don't complete,
Then
that the
next week.
remainder would be much more manageable if we have to simply find
An
couple
evening
of hours
session.
an evening or another evening.
Yes, yes.
So I certainly have no difficulty with your
Yeah.
proposal.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I think let's adjourn for now, and let's start. Or let's start at 9:30 tomorrow, but with a view that, if need be, we can go even up to 7 in the evening. I'm saying up to, if we all still feel quite energetic and we have to go beyond, I think that I should be able to do that. Is that
Certainly,
fine?
Chair.
Yes.
That would
But
be obvious.
to the extent that there may be others, whether from these fact witnesses or others, that need to testify, and they would be available on some evenings next week, and they would not be too long, maybe 2 hours, 3 hours. We could look at next week to try and cover more evening sessions. Yeah.
That's certainly in order with me, Chair.
Yes. Okay. No, that's fine. Okay. I think let's adjourn then now, and then tomorrow we'll start at 9:30. We adjourn.
Yeah.